Do we have a timekeeper in here somewhere? Yay, thank you.
There you go. Sorry about that.
Ready to go?
You're ready to go.
All right, let's go with the state first, housekeeping, and we need to take care of it before trial starts.
Yes, Your Honor, permission to invoke Rule 603, which is the constructive swearing in of all witnesses.
Sure.
Permission to invoke the rule with regards to the lay witnesses. We also met and conferred with opposing counsel before today's trial and agreed to pre-admit some exhibits. Can I list those now?
Yeah, please.
Exhibit 2, Exhibit 3, Exhibit 10, Exhibit 11, Exhibit 12, and Exhibit 14.
There's no objection to these exhibits?
None, Your
All
Honor.
right, those exhibits are admitted. Anything else?
Yes, Your Honor, we ask for permission to move freely about the well during openings, examinations, and closing.
Yeah, no problem.
That's it for our housekeeping matters.
Anything from the defense?
Just a handful, Your Honor. First, it's our understanding that objections are heard constructively in this courtroom. May we presume seen in front of you?
Sure, I don't know that I know what that means.
Just
say they're held heard constructively.
Just that for anything that may be sensitive, such as hearsay, you don't need to physically approach the bench to deal with that objection.
Okay, that's fine.
All right, thank you. And then also for the purpose of approaching witnesses, would you like us to ask each time before we approach the witness or just the first time?
I think you need to ask each time and consider what that implies.
All right, thank you. And then finally, Your Honor, for the purposes of this proceeding, we ask that the defendant can be constructively seated at the defense counsel table.
Yes.
And for the purposes of identification, may we refer to the defendant as the man sitting at defense counsel table in blue tie?
Yes.
Thank you. All right, with that, Your Honor, I believe we addressed all our housekeeping matters.
Okay, I mean, that's okay with you, the man sitting at defense table with the blue tie.
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay, great. Yep, then very good. That's all I need. Anything else we need to take care of before we begin?
Yes, Your Honor, we do have motions.
Okay, what are they?
Your Honor, we met and conferred with opposing counsel before trial and were able to reach a substantive agreement. I'd like to put that on the record now.
Okay.
Your Honor, the parties agreed to exclude a previous 2021 incident involving Detective Parker Drew, the police officer we'll be calling today.
Okay.
In that incident,
Well, I need to know about it. You guys have agreed to exclude it.
yes, Your Honor, it's
Move
out.
on.
With that, we're ready for trial.
Anything from the defense?
Yes, Your Honor, we have one brief motion in limine.
And that is?
Just by way of brief background, Your Honor, on July 12th, 2022, the day after the robbery and kidnapping at issue today, Marcus Wallace was arrested for a violation of his parole. Now, Mr. Wallace was on parole because back in 2008, he was arrested and convicted of robbery in the first degree. This parole violation that occurred was due to the fact that he voluntarily disclosed to his parole officer that he was using methamphetamine. Now, at the time that he was serving out 40 days for the parole violation, he was served with a warrant for arrest in this case. So with all that background, Your Honor, we're going to ask the court to grant our motion in limine and limiting out really 4 pieces of evidence in today's trial. Mr. Wallace's prior robbery conviction in 2008, the fact that he was on parole, the fact that parole was violated by his meth use, and finally, the fact that he was in jail at the time that he was charged in this proceeding. We believe that this evidence should be limited out first for the probation violation, the meth use, and the fact that he was in jail and served in this case for 3 reasons. First, it's not relevant to the charges that Mr. Wallace faces today. Second, it's improper character evidence. And finally, any probative value that those pieces of evidence have are outweighed by a substantial risk of unfair
What's your
prejudice.
response to all of this?
Your Honor, there are a number of different issues raised there, and we need to take them one at a time.
Okay, let's.
First, we don't intend on offering any evidence that Mr. Wallace was previously convicted for robbery, nor that he used meth on the day in question, nor that he violated his parole. But we are interested in the fact that the defendant was in jail and that he was arrested and booked 9 hours after this crime was committed. And Your Honor, that's because it goes to identity, a use of character evidence number 404B.
Wait, hold on. So he was in, I thought I heard he was in jail when he was served with a warrant for arrest.
Yes, Your Honor. He was in jail for a parole violation.
Right,
And then while in jail, he was served with another
Right.
warrant for arrest.
for this crime that we're trying here today.
Yes, Your Honor.
So why is it relevant where he was served with that warrant?
Because it bears on the weight of the fingerprint evidence in this case, if I may explain.
Yeah.
One of the key pieces of evidence that the state will present today is a fingerprint found at the scene of the crime that the state determined to match the defendant. Now, we anticipate the defense will argue that, well, this fingerprint could have come from anywhere or at any time. We need to offer evidence that the defendant was in jail for 20 years leading up to, or pardon me, for 14 years leading up to this crime.
Why?
Because
Why do we have to do any of that other than to establish the fact that for some reason, God only knows what, the state had access to this man's fingerprints in a fingerprint database somewhere?
Your Honor, it doesn't go to the fingerprint database. It goes to the period of time during which it would have been possible for the defendant to leave a fingerprint on a $20 bill. Because the defendant was in jail for 14 years, up until 42 days before this crime was committed, it rebuts the defense's argument about when or how.
Do you have any expert testimony that's gonna talk about how long a fingerprint is on a $20 bill?
Your Honor, we'll be calling Detective Drew to the stand today, who we will be laying the foundation for to be an expert in fingerprint analysis. Now, in Detective Drew's,
Fingerprint analysis, is he also an expert in how long a fingerprint lasts on a dollar bill?
not that specifically, Your Honor, and that's what makes this evidence about the defendant's period of incarceration so important. Just by,
I find this highly suspect, so I'm gonna grant your motion limited, but that is not an evidentiary ruling. I am not ruling on the exclusion of this evidence. I just need to hear more before I can make a ruling.
Of course, Your Honor.
yes, Your Honor.
Anything else?
Just one last thing, Your Honor. Based on your ruling on those previous issues, we would also ask that for a motion in limine as to Exhibit 1. Now, Exhibit 1 is a copy of the mugshot taken of Marcus Wallace directly coming from this parole violation. It's not as much the photo we object to, Your Honor, as the information below the photo.
Can you redact the information below the photo?
We would object to that, Your Honor. The only information below the photo, it says Marcus James Wallace, date 7/12/2022. And we need that information because that's the day after the robbery was committed. An eyewitness will testify that the robber was wearing an orange shirt and blue jeans. And Your Honor, in this photograph, you can see that the robber is wearing an orange shirt the morning
So why
after the
is
robbery.
this, why is this, whatever, language so bad?
Your Honor, we're mostly just concerned with the date. The fact that this mugshot states that it was taken on July 12th, 2022, when we anticipate that investigator Drew will testify that the warrant for Mr. Wallace's arrest was not served until 6:30 p.m. on July 13th, will inevitably create questions for the jury as to how the mugshot could exist for this person before they were arrested in this crime. We worry that it opens the door and it's going to be confusing to the jury and will lead to them wondering how this individual could have a booking photo.
What is the purpose of this photograph? Just to identify this gentleman?
Yes, Your Honor, it goes to his identity and further the specific things that he was wearing, because Your Honor, it's stipulated between the parties that the defendant had not slept between the time when this crime was committed and when he was booked the next day. So the
That means
things,
he couldn't change his clothes.
Your Honor, it makes it more likely.
I've changed my clothes twice today. Think that makes me a criminal?
It would go to the weight of the evidence, Your Honor, but I don't believe it makes you criminal.
Right.
We're interested in
I
this.
also don't think the fact that the state has my fingerprints somewhere on a file somewhere makes me a criminal. Okay, take it out. Date comes off.
Yes, Your Honor, we're fine without the date on this.
Okay. Do we need to do that constructively?
Yes, Your Honor, constructive redaction is fine.
Okay. Constructive redaction.
Your Honor, should the defense open the door to when this photo was taken, we'd ask to rephrase our motion.
Sure. Right, no problem.
Yeah, we have no anticipation to bring that up.
Let's see how it plays out. Right. Okay, cool. Anything else?
Nothing further from the defense.
All right. State, would you like to start with an opening statement?
Yes, Your Honor.
Please proceed.
The defendant left his mark. It's a warm summer night, and Charlie Wilson is pulling into her driveway. She thinks she's going to go inside, heat up some leftovers, maybe watch some TV. She doesn't know. She won't be going inside. She doesn't know that this is about to be the worst night of her life. The first thing she sees is a cinder block come crashing through her passenger window and a man crawling inside of her car, the first thing she feels is the tip of his knife pressed against her throat. And the first words she hears, "Drive. If you look at my face, I'll kill you." Members of the jury, Miss Wilson did look at that man's face. At every stop sign, she studied the left side of his profile. At every red light, she burned his image into her memory. When he left and the car light illuminated his face, she stared. Stared at his face, at his stubble, at his clothing, and most of all, at his damaged left eye. She stared, members of the jury. So if she survived, she could tell the police, tell you exactly who did this to her. Today she'll tell you. It was the defendant, Marcus Wallace. The physical evidence will tell you. It was the defendant, Marcus Wallace. Because when he fled that night, he left 2 marks behind. His fingerprint inside of that car and his image in Miss Wilson's memory. The evidence will show the defendant left his mark. That's why we've charged the defendant with armed robbery and kidnapping. We have the burden to prove the defendant's guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. Now, the crime in this case is unusual. A man broke into Miss Wilson's car, stole her money, made her drive to a gas station so he could buy cigarettes, and then drop them right back off where they started. Today, we won't ask you to make sense of this senseless crime, but we'll prove it was the defendant who did it with 3 pieces of evidence. His profile, his property, his print. Let's take those one at a time, starting with that first piece of evidence, the defendant's profile. Miss Wilson will tell you that she used those red lights and stop signs as opportunities to identify her attacker. Look left for oncoming traffic. Look right at the man who was robbing her. Today, we'll give her a map. Ask her to count out each and every stop sign where she looked at that man's face. 1, 2, 3, 4 on the way there, and on the way back. 5, 6, 7, 8. When that man got out of Miss Wilson's car, she stared at his whole face for 2 minutes. She'll tell you, the robber was white, male, 30s or 40s, some facial hair, 1 normal eye, and 1 damaged eye, moving all around. Today you'll learn the defendant is white, male, in his 30s, some facial hair, 1 normal eye, and 1 damaged eye, moving all around. The police showed Miss Wilson a photo lineup. She identified the defendant. She said, "That's him. I'm positive." Now, I want to be upfront. When the police put together that photo lineup, they had to get creative. because of the defendant's unique and distinct eye condition, there was nobody else that matched the description. You'll learn the police looked through DMV photos, mugshots, couldn't find anyone who looked like him. So they used artificial intelligence to generate 5 pictures of 5 men that matched that description with an eye condition. When Miss Wilson saw those photographs, she thought they were real. And she identified the defendant as the man who robbed her. But whatever you may think of the photo lineup procedure in this case, we want you to remember one thing. The description Miss Wilson gave before she ever went in for that lineup. White, male, 30s or 40s, some facial hair, 1 normal eye, and 1 damaged eye, moving all around. That brings us to our second piece of evidence, the defendant's property. Today you'll learn that the defendant was arrested 9 hours after this crime was committed. And we're going to ask you to compare the things the robber was wearing during this crime with what the defendant had just 9 hours later. Miss Wilson will tell you the robber was wearing an orange shirt and blue jeans. 9 hours later, the defendant had an orange shirt on and blue jeans. An employee from the gas station will tell you that the robber did something unusual that night. He bought cigarettes, but not a pack of cigarettes. You'll learn he bought loose cigarettes, loose Camel cigarettes. And when the defendant was arrested 9 hours later, he had cigarettes, not a pack of cigarettes. Police found loose Camel cigarettes. When they searched the defendant's home, they found a receipt. They found a receipt from that gas station from the day of the robbery. Fact number 3, the defendant's print. Now, members of the jury, I want to be very clear about the evidence we have today and the evidence we don't. When the police examined Miss Wilson's car, they didn't find anyone's DNA. No hair, no skin, no blood. And they didn't find any fingerprints on the car. But you'll learn, they found a fingerprint in the car. A fingerprint on a $20 bill on the seat where the robber was sitting. A fingerprint expert examined that print. He found it matched the defendant. A second fingerprint expert examined that print, found it matched the defendant. They ran that fingerprint through the computer, through the FBI database, compared it to 72 million people nationwide. And you'll learn that out of 72 million people all across the country, the closest match was someone right here in town, the defendant. Members of the jury, that night, the defendant took Miss Wilson's money. He took her debit card. He took her sense of safety. But the evidence will show the defendant didn't just take. He left his fingerprint in that car. He left his image in Miss Wilson's memory. At the end of this trial, we'll ask you to find the defendant guilty of armed robbery and kidnapping. Because the defendant left his mark. Thank you for your time.
And Steve, can you make a note and say that it's time?
Yes, Your Honor.
Right, you may proceed.
A rushed investigation leads to a result that can't be trusted. When the police spend less than 2 days, less than 48 hours, investigating serious and violent crime, they are bound to miss something. They are bound to leave open questions. Now, this all starts after Charlie Wilson experiences something tragic, something terrifying. On the night of July 11th, 2022, the police respond to a call about a robbery and kidnapping. And when they arrive, things go well. Investigator Parker Drew bags and tags important evidence, takes photos at the scene, and sits Miss Wilson down, asking her to share everything that she can remember from that night. Miss Wilson does the best she can. Just 30 minutes after the attack began, she fills out a suspect identification form. She describes her attacker as a white man, average height, average weight. She can't remember the color of his hair, but thinks he might have had some facial hair. But most importantly, she says that her attacker had what she calls a major eye problem. She said it looked like his eye was either too big or too small, like it didn't fit in his head right. And at this point, she notes, I think it was his left eye, but I can't really remember. Less than 30 minutes after the attack, this is the description Miss Wilson gives to the police. And this general description makes sense. It was dark when Miss Wilson was attacked, and the entire attack really didn't last very long. What the state didn't tell you is that there's another person who saw Charlie Wilson's attacker that night. Another person who stood just feet away from the person who did this, looked them in the eyes, and did everything they could to memorize this person's face. A person named Carrie Smith. And Miss Smith saw the attacker up close and personal because she was working in the Gasco when the attacker came in that night. Miss Wilson will tell you today that it was a slow shift that night, and she was standing behind the counter watching YouTube videos on her phone when someone came in the door and immediately caught her attention. Now, this wasn't like the one other customer she'd had that night. This person was acting off. From the moment they got in the gas station, they were walking frantically up and down the aisles, picking things up, looking at them and then putting them down, scratching the back of their neck and constantly turning around to the parking lot. Miss Smith couldn't help but pay attention to this person. And then when he walked right up to her and handed her his debit card with nothing in his hands to buy, she really began to study his face. Now, Miss Smith will get on the stand today, and she will tell you that she remembers a white man. She remembers an orange shirt. But most importantly, she remembers a major eye problem. The man she saw that night had an eye so mangled, so sunken into his head that she couldn't even tell whether there was an eye in the socket at all. She will tell you that the person she saw had a right eye deformity. A completely different person than the defendant Marcus Wallace. Now we anticipate the state is going to focus on 3 key pieces of evidence that they say are conclusive of Marcus Wallace's guilt. The problem with those pieces of evidence is that each and every one is just short of giving you an answer. Let's first talk about the fingerprint. Now, they will talk about, with their investigator, Drew, she will get on the stand and explain that a fingerprint was found on the $20 bill in Charlie Wilson's vehicle. The only problem is that that fingerprint had 5 possible matches. Out of 72 million, the system limited it down to 5. And the police couldn't even be bothered to check the other 4. We'll also hear about a receipt found in Marcus Wallace's trash can. But it's important to note what this receipt does and doesn't say. The state won't be able to tell you what time the transaction on that receipt occurred. They won't be able to tell you whether it was a cash transaction, credit, or debit. They won't be able to tell you what was bought or who was buying it. Because despite finding this piece of evidence, it is entirely illegible. And the last thing that we anticipate you'll hear throughout this trial is about a lineup created by the police. And this lineup had 1 photo of a real person and 5 photos of people who just don't exist. People created with artificial intelligence. Now, we'll show you this lineup today, and we cannot wait for you to see it. Now, we are only here today because the state chose to charge Marcus Wallace with robbery in the 1st degree and kidnapping in the 2nd degree. And when they made that decision, they assumed a burden. Not just to prove that a robbery and a kidnapping occurred and that someone did it, but that a robbery and kidnapping occurred and that Marcus Wallace did it. They must do so beyond a reasonable doubt. The highest standard in our criminal justice system, even higher than what they would have to prove to take your kids away. Now, throughout this trial, members of the jury, we urge you to pay attention to each and every place that just one more step of police work would have given you an answer rather than a question. Because when you do, you will see an investigation and a result that simply cannot be trusted.
Yes, Your Honor, we call Charlie Wilson to the stand.
Wilson, come on up.
As soon as it sits down, you may proceed.
Yes, Your Honor. Good afternoon. Could you please introduce yourself to the members of the jury?
Hi, my name is Charlie Wilson.
Where are you from, Ms. Wilson?
I'm from here in Centralia.
Can you tell us what you do for a living?
I'm a law student at Centralia State, and I work part-time too at the Olive Garden.
Why are you here today?
Last year, a man got into my car. He held a knife to my throat, and he robbed me.
Did you get a good look at the man who robbed you?
Yes,
Do you see that man in the courtroom today?
yes, he's sitting at the defense table. He's wearing a blue tie.
May the record reflect the witness has identified the defendant.
So reflective.
Let's talk about how The defendant robbed you. When did this happen?
It was July 11th of last year. It's around 10:30 at night.
Can you tell us about the first moment that you saw the defendant?
I was just sitting in my car in my driveway. I just got off work, and he comes up to my car. He threw this cement block through my passenger window, and then he climbed inside my car, like head first.
And then?
He held a knife. He held a knife to my throat. He was so close to me, I could smell the cigarettes on him. I remembered the tip of the knife just up against my neck. That's when he told me to drive.
When the defendant held a knife to your throat and told you to drive, how did you react?
I started driving. He told me to go to a gas station. So I went to the Gas and Go on Main Street.
When you were driving, how was the defendant acting?
Frantic. He was just waving the knife around, threatening me and screaming at me.
Threatening you how?
If you don't do what I tell you, I'm going to kill you. If you even glance at me, I'm going to kill you.
What happened when you got to the gas station?
He got out of the car. I waited about 10 minutes until he came back.
You said you waited 10 minutes. Why didn't you just drive away?
I couldn't. He took my keys.
Why didn't you run away?
He had my ID. And he said that now he knows where I live. And if I tried to escape, he would find me.
When the defendant was away from the car for 10 minutes, could you see what he was doing?
No, he told me that I had to look at the floorboards. So that's what I did.
Did the defendant come back to the car?
Yes.
What happened?
He told me that I had to take him back to where we started. So I drove home.
When you were driving back home, where was that knife?
He was just tapping it against his knee. The whole time, he was just tapping.
What happened when you got back to your house?
He got out of the car, and it was so weird. He stood there for probably 2 minutes at least, and then he ran off. That's when I called the police.
After the defendant left your car, did you notice anything inside of your car that you hadn't seen before?
Yes, there was a $20 bill.
Where was that $20 bill that you hadn't noticed before?
It was on the passenger seat, exactly where he was sitting.
What happened when the police arrived?
Well, I gave them the $20 bill. I told them everything I knew. 2 days later, I went down to do a photo lineup.
Before we get to that photo lineup, I want to talk about how good of a look you got at the defendant's face. Publishing Exhibit 10 has already done this. It's already up. Ms. Wilson, when you were driving, did you get any opportunities to take a look at the defendant's face?
Yes, I looked at him at every stop sign.
How many stop signs were there?
There's 4 on the way there and 4 on the way back. So that's 8 times.
If the defendant had told you if you even glanced at him, he was going to kill you, why did you look at him anyway?
If I survived, I wanted to be able to tell the police who did this to me.
I want the jury to get a sense of how close you were to the defendant's face when you were looking at his face in the car. If I were to walk towards you, could you tell me to stop when I'm as close as the defendant was?
Yes.
Your Honor, may I approach the witness? Sure.
Stop.
May the record reflect the witness has indicated a distance of about 3 feet. Ms. Wilson, you also said there was a moment when the defendant was standing outside of the car. What were you doing at that time?
I was staring at him. I was trying to burn his face into my memory
How long was the defendant standing outside of the car?
for about 2 minutes.
How well could you see the defendant when he was standing outside of the car for 2 minutes?
Well, he left my door open, so my overhead car light was on. I saw him perfectly.
What was he wearing?
He was wearing an orange shirt and blue jeans.
What did he look like?
He was white and a man. He was in his 30s or 40s. He had a little bit of facial hair, but not a ton. And one of his eyes was really messed up.
What do you mean by that? One of his eyes was really messed up.
It was like it didn't fit into his head. It would move in all different directions.
Which one of the defendant's eyes looked really messed up?
I wasn't positive, but I thought it was the left.
Let's compare the description you just gave us to the description that you gave to the police. Publishing Exhibit 3, this is already in evidence. Ms. Wilson, what are we looking at here?
This is the description that I gave to the police after I was robbed.
Did you give the police this description before or after you did that photo line?
This was before.
How soon after you were robbed did you give a description of the robber to the police?
A half an hour.
How much of what you told us today about that description is the same as what you put on the sheet?
All of it.
Thank you. You can take that down. Let's talk about the photo lineup that you did. Are you aware that some of the photos that you looked up in that lineup were made with artificial intelligence?
I am now.
You say you are now. At the time that you did the lineup, were you aware?
No, I had no idea. I was shocked.
What did you think you were looking at when you were in that lineup?
6 actual people.
How did the police show you those photos?
They showed them to me one at a time.
If I were to show you those photos one at a time, would you be able to tell the jury what you were thinking when you were looking at each of those photos?
Yes.
Publishing Exhibit 2. Number 1.
Maybe, but no. The guy that I saw didn't have an eye patch, and this doesn't look like him.
Number 2.
No way.
Number 3.
That's him. That's the man that robbed me.
Number 4.
No.
Number 5.
No.
What about number 6?
No.
Mr. Jones, could you take us back to number 3? Ms. Wilson, how sure are you that the man that robbed you is the defendant, Marcus Wallace?
I'm positive.
Thank you. Pass the witness.
Cross-examination.
Yes, Your Honor. Before I begin, may I set up a case for use of some blocks? Ms. Wilson, I want to go back to the start of your attack. Now, you mentioned on direct examination it started around 10:30 p.m.
Yes,
So it was dark outside when your attack began.
yes,
And you said that your attack started with a cinder block coming in through your window,
that's right.
and that the man who attacked you crawled in after it.
Yeah, he like crawled in head first.
But at that point, he didn't open your door.
No,
So the interior lights of your car were off.
at that point,
So on the drive to the gas and go, the interior lights in your car were off.
right,
So it was dark inside too.
inside the car,
Yes.
yes,
On the drive to that gas and go, you mentioned this on direct, your attacker kept threatening,
that's right.
waving that knife around.
Yeah, and tapping it on his knee.
You were terrified,
I was,
more scared than you've ever been in your entire life.
yes,
You thought if he didn't do what he told you to, he would kill you.
yes,
And what he was telling you to do, what he was screaming at you to do while waving around that knife, was stop looking at
yes,
him. On that drive, your main focus was survival.
I was scared.
Given those instructions and the fear you must have been under, I want to talk about what you remember doing. Now, on the way to the gas and go, you say you remember looking at your attacker at every stop sign, right?
Yes,
And that when you got to the gas station, you also remember looking at his face when he was rummaging through your stuff.
right,
And then when you got back home, you also remember looking at him when he was back.
yes,
Now, he had told you that he would kill you if you so much as glanced at him.
right,
But throughout that attack, you ignored that instruction over and over again.
yes,
But when he left you in your car alone, he told you to look at the floorboards, right?
right,
And the entire time he was in that gas station, you followed that instruction.
that's right.
You looked at your feet,
I just kept my eyes on the floorboards.
never once looking.
No,
So when your attacker was in the gas station, away from you, you followed his instructions.
I just looked at the floorboards.
I want to talk about that identification you went through with opposing counsel just a minute ago. Your Honor, may I put up what's been previously entered as Exhibit 3? It'll be a blown up.
Of course.
Thank you, Your Honor. So, Ms. Wilson, like you said on direct examination, you wrote all this down just 30 minutes after your attack.
Yeah, it was about that.
And I want to run through a little bit what you wrote down. Now, you mentioned that you wrote down white man,
Yes,
average height,
yes,
average weight,
right.
some facial hair.
Yeah, but not a lot.
Right, but not a ton. And you couldn't really tell what his hair color was.
Right,
Didn't remember what hairstyle.
yes,
But when you were describing that major eye problem, what you wrote down was, I think it was his left eye,
yeah,
but I can't really remember.
that's right.
Now, despite that, you were 100% sure that it was the defendant who attacked you that night.
I know it's him. I didn't know his name at the time, but
So-
I'm 100% sure.
So you're now 100% sure, 15 months after the event, that it was your attacker's left eye that had a major eye problem.
I'm 100% sure that that's him and it's his left eye.
Okay. So I want to get back to this, but I want to talk about the lineup as well. Your Honor, may I put up a blown up copy of? So this is the lineup that you were shown a little over 30 hours after your attack.
Right,
Now, photo number 1 has nothing wrong with his left eye,
it doesn't look like it.
and an eye patch over his way.
Right,
So you can't see if one of them is a weird color.
no,
Can't even see his right eye at all.
that's right.
And to be clear, you never mentioned an eye patch to the police.
No,
And this man has a full beard.
It looks like it.
Now, when you were first shown this photo, you thought he might have been your attacker.
Yeah, briefly I thought it was possible, but then I quickly ruled it out.
But even if just for a moment you thought a man with a completely normal looking left eye and a right eye you couldn't even see could have been the man who attacked you that night.
Right.
So 30 minutes after your attack, you couldn't really remember what eye it was.
Yes.
And then 30 hours after your attack, you also couldn't quite be sure what eye it was.
I didn't identify that guy. It didn't-
But Ms. Wilson, you thought for a moment it could have been your attacker.
Right.
So 30 hours after your attack, you couldn't be sure.
Right. It wasn't possible.
But now, 15 months later, you are 100% sure the defendant attacked you.
I'm 100% sure it was the defendant, which is why I know that it's that guy.
Despite 15 months ago, within hours and minutes of your attack, you couldn't quite remember.
Objection to asked and answered.
So, Ms. Wilson, despite 15 months ago, within just hours and minutes of your attack, you couldn't quite remember
Remember what?
which eye it was.
Yes.
Okay, so to be clear, you couldn't quite remember near the attack.
Yes, I didn't know which eye it was for sure when he attacked me.
Or within 30 hours, right?
Right.
Thank you for your time, Ms. Wilson. Pass the witness, Your Honor.
Do we have redirect?
No redirect, Your Honor.
All right, thank you. Just step down.
Who are your next witness?
Yes, Your Honor. The state calls Detective Parker Drew to the stand.
Detective Drew. Come on up. And just for, so I don't ask you again, are you allowed recross and redirect?
You're allowed redirect, Your Honor. You're only allowed recross for the purposes of impeachment.
Okay, thank you.
May I proceed?
Yes, thank you.
Good afternoon.
Afternoon,
Could you please introduce yourself to the members of the jury?
Parker Drew.
What do you do for a living?
I'm the chief detective at the Centralia Sheriff's Department, sir.
In which division?
Major crimes.
Detective, how are you involved in this case?
I investigated the alleged robbery and kidnapping of Charlie Wilson.
Did your investigation lead to an arrest?
Yes, sir.
Who did you arrest?
Marcus Wallace.
Do you see the man that you arrested in the courtroom today?
Yes, sir. He's sitting at the end of defense counsel table wearing a blue tie.
May the record reflect the witness has identified the defendant.
Sure.
Detective, I want to talk about what led you to arresting the defendant. When did you start investigating this crime?
The night of the robbery, sir. July 11th, 2022.
How did you investigate this crime?
I interviewed the victim, conducted a photo lineup, canvassed the scene, looked for additional eyewitnesses, examined the victim's car, ran forensics, searched the defendant's home.
Detective, was your investigation concluded in 48 hours?
No, sir.
Did you work on this case for only 2 days?
No, sir.
How long did you investigate this case?
Most of the work was done in the first 48 hours, but I worked this case for 11 months to make sure we had everything.
I want to be clear about the evidence you were able to find and the evidence you weren't able to find. Detective, did you find any DNA evidence in that car?
No, sir. We tested the car for DNA. We didn't find anyone's DNA.
If you didn't have any DNA, how were you able to make an arrest?
3 reasons, sir. The evidence from the eyewitness, the evidence from the defendant, and the evidence from the car.
All right, Detective, I want to walk through those reasons one at a time, starting with the eyewitness evidence. Now, which eyewitness are you referring to?
The victim, Charlie Wilson.
What evidence did you obtain from Ms. Wilson?
Ms. Wilson described her attacker and picked him out of a photo lineup.
Before we get to the specifics of that description, Detective, would you recognize the man that you arrested for this crime?
Yes, sir.
Showing opposing counsel can mark as Exhibit 1. May I approach the witness with consent?
Sure.
Here you go, Detective. Detective, do you recognize what I've handed you?
Yes, sir.
What is it?
This is a photo of Marcus Wallace.
How do you know?
I arrested him, sir.
The state offers Exhibit 1 into evidence.
Any objection to one?
No objection, Your Honor, as long as it's constructively redacted as addressed in for trial.
Yes, that's fine. One is admitted.
Yes, Your Honor. Publishing Exhibit 1. Detective, how did Miss Wilson describe the man who robbed her?
Like she said today, Ms. Wilson described the robber as white, male, 30s or 40s, some facial hair, not a lot, major eye problem.
When did she give that description?
Before she did the photo lineup, 30 minutes after the robbery.
How many of those characteristics, and Miss Wilson described 30 minutes after the robbery, match the defendant?
All of them, sir. Mr. Wallace is a white male, 30s, some facial hair, not a lot, major eye problem.
Now let's talk about the photo lineup. What is a photo lineup, Detective?
That's when you show an eyewitness at least 6 photographs and see if they identify your suspect.
I want to be upfront with the jury. Detective, did you use artificial intelligence in that photo lineup?
Yes, sir.
How many of the photos were AI generated?
5 AI photos, sir.
Detective, why would you use AI in a police photo lineup?
I needed to make sure that everyone in that lineup had an eye problem. Otherwise, it wouldn't be fair to the defendant.
Why didn't you just use pictures of real people with eye conditions?
I tried. I looked at DMV photos, mug shots, booking photos. I couldn't find anyone with an eye problem like the defendants.
So how did you get those other 5 images?
I entered the victim's description into our AI software, word for word. Then I spent hours going through those photos and selecting the ones that were most similar to the victim's description.
When you showed the victim that photo lineup, who did she identify as her attacker?
The defendant, no hesitation.
All right, Detective, let's move to the second reason why you mentioned you arrested the defendant, the booking evidence. Now, what is booking evidence?
And that's the property that's collected when someone is arrested and booked.
When was the defendant booked?
The morning after the robbery, sir.
When the defendant was booked the morning after the robbery, what property did he have in his possession?
Orange shirt, blue jeans, lighter, 2 cigarettes.
What kinds of cigarettes?
Loose Camel cigarettes, sir.
Can you tell us what loose cigarettes actually are?
That just means they're not in a pack. They're by themselves, loose.
Why was the orange shirt significant?
That's what the victim said her robber was wearing.
Why were the blue jeans significant?
That's what the victim said her robber was wearing.
Why were the loose Camel cigarettes significant?
The victim said her robber smelled like cigarettes.
Detective, did you ever search the defendant's home?
Yes, sir.
What'd you find?
I found part of a gas and go receipt.
What do you mean, part of a receipt?
Some of it was illegible, but I could read the top.
What could you read?
It said gas and go, Centerville.
Why was that receipt significant in your investigation?
The victim said the robber made her drive to the gas and go and got out of the car there.
Well, Detective, how do you know the robber went to the same gas and go that receipt in the defendant's home was from?
Because the receipt said gas and go, Centerville. There's only one gas and go in Centerville, sir.
What was the date of this robbery?
July 11th, 2022.
What was the date on the receipt you found in the defendant's home?
Same date, sir. July 11th, 2022.
Let's talk about that third reason that you said you arrested the defendant, the fingerprint evidence. Now, Detective, who analyzed the fingerprints in this case?
I did.
Is that something you're trained to do?
Yes, sir.
Are you board certified in fingerprint analysis?
Yes, sir.
How many times have you analyzed fingerprints in an ongoing investigation?
About 200 times.
Have you ever been accepted by a court of law as an expert in fingerprint analysis?
Yes, sir.
All right, detective, so where did you look for fingerprints in this case?
I dusted the victim's car, sir, both the surfaces and the contents. Outside handles, inside handles, keys, phone, and the $20 bill on the passenger seat.
How many fingerprints did you find?
We found a lot of prints, sir, but only one that was high enough quality to make an identification.
And where was that print?
It was on that $20 bill.
Detective, how did you determine where that print on the $20 bill came from?
Well, I compared the print we were able to lift from that bill to the defendant's print. I put both of those prints through our fingerprint software, the Automated Fingerprint Identification System, or AFIS for short.
How do you compare two different fingerprints?
You put them side by side and you look for points of agreement.
And what are points of agreement?
Every part of the prints that are both distinctive and a match. Every arch, delta, loop, furrow, ridge, whorl, that's the same between the suspect print and the surface print.
That process that you just described, detective, is it standard in the field of fingerprint analysis?
Yes, sir.
Were you able to reach a conclusion in this case?
Yes.
Did you reach that conclusion to a reasonable degree of scientific certainty?
Yes, sir.
Tell the jury, who did that print on the $20 bill belong to?
The defendant.
I want to use pictures of those fingerprints to break down that conclusion for the jury. Your Honor, permission to approach the witness to exhibits 11, 12, and 14. They're already in evidence.
Yeah, sure.
Here you go, detective. Let's start with exhibit 14. Now, what's that?
Exhibit 14 is a photograph of that $20 bill that we recovered from the victim's passenger seat.
What's exhibit 11?
Exhibit 11 is my analysis of the print that we were able to lift from that bill.
How about exhibit 12? What's that?
That's my analysis of the defendant's fingerprint.
Detective, would it help you explain your conclusions to the jury if you could step down and make use of the enlarged version of these exhibits?
Yes, sir.
Your Honor, permission for the witness to step down?
Yeah, of course.
Detective, I want to start with exhibit 14. Your Honor, for the record, we're publishing exhibit 14 for the jury. Now, where's the fingerprint that you were able to recover?
It's right here, sir, in the upper left-hand corner above the marking D4. It's visible to the naked eye because I dusted it with black powder.
And how did you go about figuring out where that fingerprint came from?
Once I lifted it, I put it side by side with the defendant's fingerprint and performed a comparison.
Let's take a look at that. Publishing exhibits 11 and 12. All right, detective, we've got two different fingerprints on screen. Which one's which?
Exhibit 11 here is my analysis of the print on the $20 bill. Exhibit 12 is my analysis of the defendant's print.
What are those orange shaded regions?
The orange regions are the areas where the pattern was the clearest. That's where I focused my analysis.
How about those yellow dots? What do those mean?
Those are the points of agreement. Every dot has the same shape and ridge pattern as its mate on the corresponding print.
How many points of agreement do you need to declare two fingerprints as a match?
There's no universal standard. Some law enforcement agencies require 8 points of agreement, others require 12.
Detective, how many points of agreement did you find between the fingerprint at the crime scene and the defendant's print?
48.
Thank you, detective. You can retake your seat. Ms. Gaskins, we'll leave that up for just a moment. Detective, you told us you found 48 points of agreement between these two prints. How many points did you find that didn't match?
0.
Well, we talked about your conclusions. Let's talk about what the computer said. You ran the sprint through an FBI database, did you say that earlier?
Yes, I did, sir. So I compared it to people all over the country,
How many people from all across the country?
72 million.
When you compared the fingerprint from the crime scene to 72 million people, detective, who was the closest match?
The defendant.
Thank you for your time, detective. We passed the witness.
Cross-examination.
Yes, you may proceed.
Can I take a moment to set up easily for that? All right, investigator, thank you for your patience. Permission to proceed, Your Honor?
Yes.
Okay. Investigator, let's start by talking about a couple of things that you and I can agree on. You're the chief investigator for the Major Crimes Unit.
Yes, ma'am.
So at least part of your job is actively investigating serious and maybe violent crime.
That's right.
And when you're investigating a crime, one of your goals is to do a complete investigation,
Absolutely, ma'am.
to be thorough.
Yes, ma'am.
Because in your line of work, if you aren't complete and thorough, you could miss something.
That's right.
And if you miss something, an innocent person could go to jail,
Yes, ma'am.
or a guilty person could go free.
Yes, ma'am.
Given that, I want to talk about the witnesses that you interviewed or didn't interview throughout your investigation. Now, you were one of the responding officers on the scene on July 11th, 2022.
Yes, ma'am.
When you arrived, you spoke to Charlie Wilson.
Yes.
You asked her to write down everything that she could remember about the attack and her attacker that night, right?
That's right, ma'am.
And in that suspect description, she described the person who attacked her as a white male,
That's right.
average height, average weight.
Yes, ma'am.
She couldn't remember the color of his hair.
That's right.
But thought he might have had some facial hair.
Some facial hair, but not a ton, were her words.
All right, some facial hair. But the biggest detail that she put on that suspect identification form was that her attacker had a major eye problem.
That's what the victim reported. Yes.
She said that it looked like the eye was either too big or too small, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Like it didn't fit in the suspect's head.
Correct.
And this suspect identification form was completed less than 30 minutes after the attack began, right?
Yes, ma'am, at 11:27 p.m. that night.
And within that time, she wrote about that messed up eye that she thought that it was the left eye.
Right, but she couldn't be sure.
She couldn't really remember, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Now, as you sit here today, you know that there was another person who claims to see the person who attacked Charlie Wilson.
I'm aware that Carrie Smith, a cashier at the Gas and Go, claims to have seen a man that night.
That's right. Carrie Smith says that she also saw somebody.
Objection to hearsay?
Wants to hear something?
Your Honor, we're not offering any assertions by Carrie Smith for the truth of the matter asserted. Ms. Smith will get on the stand and offer this testimony herself. We're simply offering it for effect on the listener as to how it may have impacted this officer's investigation, given that identity is a crucial point.
Hearsay is overruled.
May I be heard?
Overruled.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Your Honor. All right, so you know now that Carrie Smith claims that she saw a person with a major eye issue as well.
That's what she claims.
She claims that the person she saw had a major eye issue with their right eye.
Yes, ma'am.
Ms. Wilson says there was a major issue with the left eye.
Yes, ma'am.
So that's two different descriptions,
Yes, ma'am.
two different versions of the same event,
Two different descriptions. Yes, ma'am.
two different descriptions of the same person.
Yes, ma'am.
I want to talk about that illegible receipt that you talked about on direct examination. Now, one day after arresting Mr. Wallace, you went and searched his home
Yes, ma'am.
and you found a receipt in the trash.
I did.
And on that receipt, you'd admit that there wasn't much information.
It said Gas and Go Centerville, July 11th, 2022. The rest of it was illegible, ma'am.
That's right. It told you where the receipt was from,
Gassinger, Centerville,
And it told you the date of the transaction.
July 11th, 2022.
And there was no way to make out any other information that may have been on that receipt.
That's right.
So just looking at that receipt, you don't know what was purchased.
That's right, ma'am. I just know the location and the date.
You don't know when the actual transaction occurred on July 11th, 2022.
That's right, ma'am.
You don't know if the person that that receipt comes from made a purchase in cash.
That's right, ma'am. Just the location and the date.
We don't know if that person made a purchase with a credit or debit card.
Yes, ma'am.
So there's a lot of information missing from that receipt, isn't that right?
Yes, ma'am. We just have the location and the date.
That's right. Now, once you got this receipt out of the trash, one of the first things you did was go back to the Gasco, right?
Absolutely, ma'am.
You attempted to speak to someone working there about that receipt.
I attempted to, ma'am. They refused to speak with me.
That's right. You spoke to Carrie Smith, who was the cashier working at that point in time, right?
I tried to, ma'am. She refused to speak with me.
That's right. Ms. Smith said she wasn't interested in answering any questions.
She refused. Yes, ma'am.
And you stopped right there.
Yes, ma'am. It's her right not to speak to an officer if he doesn't want to.
And you also stopped investigating the contents of that receipt right there.
We reached a dead end, ma'am. We had plenty of other evidence.
The dead end investigator, you never tried to ask whether the manager of the Centerville Gasco would release copies of the receipt to you.
Oh, that's right, ma'am. Ms. Smith refused to talk.
Well, I'm not talking about Ms. Smith, investigator. You never asked for the contact information of the manager at the Gasco.
From Carrie Smith?
Yes.
Right. She refused to talk to me.
Well, and you're a police officer. You could have subpoenaed copies of the receipts from the Gasco that night.
Sure.
You could have asked for even receipts between, let's say, 10 p.m. and midnight.
Sure.
And if you would have recovered those receipts, it's possible that that receipt you found in Mr. Wallace's trash can, you could have got the complete version.
I can't say.
Well, if you would have got the complete version, you would agree with me that a complete receipt would tell you a lot more than the receipt you found in the trash.
Certainly.
It could have told you what time on July 11th, 2022 that a purchase was made.
That's right. All the information that was missing.
Could have told you what was purchased.
Yes, ma'am.
Could have told you how that purchase was made, cash or card.
Yes, ma'am.
But all that this jury will know today is that you found an illegible receipt in Mr. Wallace's trash can.
From the receipt, they'll know the location and the date.
And that's it.
From the receipt, yes.
Because you didn't attempt to go and get a full copy of that receipt.
Objection. Ask and answer.
You didn't attempt to go and get a full copy of that receipt other than your one conversation with Carrie Smith.
That's right, ma'am. When she refused to talk to me.
All right. Now let's dig into these fingerprints, investigator. Now you collected, in your words, one viable fingerprint from the $20 bill found in Miss Wilson's car.
Yes, there was one fingerprint on the bill that was high enough quality to perform an analysis, make an identification.
So you lifted that print and you ran it through the APHIS system.
Yes, the automated fingerprint identification system.
And that system has almost 73 million fingerprints in it.
Yes, ma'am.
And APHIS narrows it down to 5 for you.
Yes, in rank order. It'll always give you 5 names, with the top name being the top match, and then it decreases in likelihood from there.
But let's be clear about what APHIS does and what you do, investigator. All that APHIS does is rank fingerprints by areas of agreement.
Yes, ma'am.
APHIS isn't responsible for assigning points of similarity on a fingerprint, right?
That's right, ma'am. That's up to the examiner.
Exactly, that's part of the comparison that you do once APHIS gives you 5 results.
Yes, ma'am.
And you would agree with me that the comparison is actually what declares whether fingerprint A and fingerprint B are a match.
Yes, ma'am.
APHIS can't be used to end an investigation.
You're right, ma'am.
It only exists to focus it,
Absolutely.
because this is still one area where humans are a lot better than computers.
Yes, ma'am. We're able to make that examination, find those points of agreement, and declare a match.
That's right. Now here, you ran a comparison analysis on the first match that APHIS gave you.
Yes, ma'am. The top match.
From there, you identified the points of similarity.
Yes, ma'am.
And that was how you concluded that, in your opinion, this fingerprint is a match for Marcus Wallace.
Yes, ma'am.
But you never ran a comparison on any of the other 4 matches that APHIS gave you.
That's right, ma'am. Mr. Wallace was a match.
Well, it's possible that all 4 of those other matches would have had points of similarity to the fingerprint found on that $20 bill.
Those weren't 4 other matches. There were 4 other names that the system gave us. I didn't perform an examination like you said.
So you've never performed a comparison on any other match besides the first one APHIS gave you.
Yes, ma'am.
So because of that, you can't tell this jury how similar any of those other prints were to the print on the $20 bill.
That's right, ma'am.
To do that, you would have had to perform a comparison.
That's right, ma'am. I can't give you the points of agreement for the other 4.
So it's possible that those other fingerprints would have had points of agreement with the fingerprint on the $20 bill.
Sure,
They could have had 5,
possibly.
could have had 45.
Statistically very unlikely, given that Marcus Wallace had 48 and that was a match.
Well, only one way to find out, investigator, right?
I didn't perform an analysis, ma'am. Marcus Wallace was a match.
Well, there's only one way to find out how similar the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, or 5th match would have been. Isn't that true?
Yes, ma'am.
That would have been to run a comparison,
Right.
which you did.
Again, ma'am, no. Marcus Wallace was a match.
All right, investigator. Now, given what we understand about fingerprints and the receipts, I want to dig down into something. So you just told us, well, actually, let me ask you. It's not possible when you look at a fingerprint for you to tell anybody what day that fingerprint got on something, right?
That's right, ma'am.
That's especially true for something like money, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so given that we know that you can't put a date on a fingerprint, you definitely can't put a time of a specific day on a fingerprint, right?
That's right, ma'am.
And all we know about this receipt due to its illegibility is that it occurred on July 11th, 2022.
The receipt was dated July 11th, 2022. Yes, ma'am.
So knowing that the receipt is illegible, knowing that you can't tell us what time that fingerprint may have got on that $20 bill, you have to agree, investigator, that it's possible that earlier on July 11th, 2022, Marcus Wallace walked into that gas station, purchased something with a $20 bill, and that $20 bill was eventually given as change to Charlie Wilson's attacker.
Sure, ma'am. Your hypothetical is possible.
Thank you, investigator. Now, one last thing. I want to talk about your lineup that you created. Now, you were the person responsible for administering this lineup to Charlie Wilson, right?
Yes, ma'am.
You were the person who took the photo of Marcus Wallace
Yes, ma'am.
and generated 5 other photos for the lineup.
Yes, ma'am.
All right. Your Honor, permission to display Exhibit 2. Now, we're looking at the lineup that you put together in this investigation. These are the photos, right?
Yes, ma'am. That's the lineup.
All right. And when you were putting this together, you testified on direct that you looked at DMV photos to try and find filler photos for this lineup, right?
Yes. What I did was I looked through the CLETS database, that's the Centralia Law Enforcement Technology Services, that holds all of the DMV photos, booking photos. I looked there first.
And let's be clear, investigator, you only spent 2 hours looking through that database.
Yes, ma'am, 2 hours.
And then you decided that you weren't going to find anything.
That's right. I wasn't finding people with that eye problem.
So you decided to try something new.
I used AI software.
And that was new to you.
Yes, ma'am.
And as far as you knew, new to your profession as well.
I do know of another officer who used AI.
Sure, but that officer didn't create photos from scratch like you did, right?
Well, that's right, ma'am.
All that officer did was add beards, isn't that right?
Yes, ma'am. So another officer did use AI. I used it for the line.
You used it to create photos from scratch, right?
Yes, ma'am.
And then you presented this lineup to Charlie Wilson. And she picked out the one real person out of this lineup.
Yes, ma'am. She identified Marcus Wallace as the attacker.
Now, investigator, I want to talk about the timeline of your investigation. You were called to the scene and spoke to Miss Wilson around 11:11 p.m. on July 11th, 2022.
Yes, ma'am.
And at 6:30 p.m. on July 13th, 2022, you had a warrant for Mr. Wallace's arrest.
Yes, ma'am.
So from the moment you walked onto the scene to the moment that you were confident enough in your investigation to arrest Marcus Wallace, that was less than 2 days,
Yes, ma'am. We had all the evidence we needed.
less than 48 hours.
Yes, ma'am.
That's how long it took you to do most of your complete and thorough investigation.
Yes, ma'am. Complete and thorough.
All right, investigator, ask the witness, John, for further questions.
Any redirects?
Yes, Your Honor. Detective, opposing counsel asked you about your fingerprint analysis in this case. Are you the only person who analyzed the fingerprint found at the crime scene?
No, sir.
Who else analyzed that fingerprint?
Another certified examiner in our office.
Did you two collaborate when you analyzed this fingerprint?
No, sir. It was an independent analysis.
What was the result of that independent analysis?
Same result, sir. It's the defendant's print.
Detective, I want to take a second to talk about the science of fingerprinting in general. Your Honor, publishing Exhibit 11. Detective, if you have a fingerprint, is it possible that lots of people are matches to a fingerprint?
No, sir. In the history of fingerprint examination, we've never found two people to have identical fingerprints, not even identical twins.
Who matched this fingerprint?
The defendant.
Thank you, Detective. We pass the witness.
We're all good?
We're good, Your Honor.
Thank you so much. You may step down.
Thank you.
At this point, I think we all might need a little bit of a break.
Your Honor, before the state rests our case, we'd like to re-raise our motion in limine regarding the defendant's term of incarceration. As in that past cross-examination, the opposing counsel opened the door. May I ask one?
You can, but let me ask you a more important question. Do you have any other witnesses to call?
No, Your Honor,
How are you gonna introduce any other evidence in this case?
because it's a substantive stipulation parties agreed to.
Okay,
Your Honor, during their cross-examination, opposing counsel asked Detective Drew about how you can determine when a fingerprint is left. If you can determine the date, if you can determine the time, and then posed a hypothetical about another time the defendant might have left a fingerprint on that dollar bill. In light of that argument, the state should be permitted to rebut that argument by showing the relatively limited window of time in which the defendant was among the general population and could have left a fingerprint on that bill.
I don't think her hypothetical says goes to where you think it went.
Your
I'm gonna
Honor,
deny it.
yes, Your Honor. The state rests.
So rest, let's take a 10-minute break.
Your Honor, we make a motion. for
Oh, go ahead.
acquittal. We don't believe that the evidence, even when viewed in the light most favorable to the state, is enough to satisfy the honor.
I think you're living in a fantasy world if that's what you think.
Your Honor, for the record, we have to make.
Okay, denied.
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, see you guys in 10 minutes.
Yes.
Oh, it's 3:25, FYI.
Yes, Your Honor.
If you can tell me, I'll just turn them down.
Go out of my chair.
Well, you get in a chair so bad it's not even funny.
Conversation will have later. Everybody can see them. All right, defense. This time, would you like to roll with this?
Yes, Defense calls Dr. Devin Lee to the stand.
Dr. Lee?
Yes, Dr. Lee.
All right, great. Dr. Lee, come on up.
And while he's taking a seat, can we set up?
Yes.
All right. Good afternoon, Dr. Lee. Could you please introduce yourself to the jury?
Hi, everyone. My name is Dr. Devin Lee.
What are you a doctor of?
Yes, I'm a professor in cognitive psychology.
What is cognitive psychology?
A somewhat broad field of study related to brain processes, specifically decision-making, judgments, problem-solving, most importantly, memory.
Do you have any special focus in one of those fields?
Yes, most of my research is actually focused on eyewitness identifications, lineups, and memory.
And how are you involved in today's case?
I actually offered my services pro bono to evaluate the reliability of the eyewitness identification in this case.
Well, why would you offer to consult on this case for free?
Yeah, it was particularly fascinating for me given my line of work, but I might be able to get an article out of it or a book or something.
Why is that?
I'm sorry, maybe I'm just getting a little bit ahead of myself, but really what stuck out to me was the use of the filler AI photos in this case. In my line of work, I think this could potentially be the start of a suggestive trend in police work, and so it was of particular interest.
Okay, well, we'll get back to that lineup a little bit later, but first, I want to walk through what you do for a living in a little bit more detail, then move on to your evaluation of the eyewitness identification, and we'll end up on that one. So first off, could you just explain to us how memory works in general?
Sure. Memory.
Objection to improper expert opinion. May I be heard?
Briefly.
The witness is now talking about what memory is, but they haven't laid foundation as to what methods this witness relied on, what facts and data they looked at, and they haven't met the prongs of 702 required to give expert testimony on this issue.
We think that memory and what memory is something that's outside of the understanding of these jurors.
No, Your Honor,
Then
they're
your
here for
objection. You may proceed.
Yes, Your Honor. So Doctor, could you explain to us how memory works in general?
Sure. So memory is simultaneously one of the best understood mental processes, but also the least well understood. In that essentially memory isn't static like most people think. It's subject to change over time, it can decay, and we subconsciously, even as we form memories, incorporate events into those memories, even if we don't intend to do so. And so in that way, memory isn't like a camera photograph. It's subject to changing quite powerfully.
Can you maybe explain a little bit more what you mean by memory being subject to change?
Yeah, it can break down, it can change with the passage of time, and there can be things that are incorporated into memory like sense impressions, tactile emotional responses that otherwise we can't necessarily control.
All right. So, Doctor, I want to, how do you actually know what you're telling us about?
Well, it's been the subject of my research for years.
Well, where do you research and what's your role there?
Yes, I'm actually a professor at the University of Alabama, Birmingham, and I am a researcher, a professor, and also the chair of the cognitive psychology department there.
Well, does all that actually leave you much time to get your hands dirty and do actual research?
Oh, yes. I mean, being in charge certainly has its perks, and I have to do research on subjects regularly, and I also publish.
What sort of things do you publish?
Yeah, I have done about a dozen studies in the nature of eyewitness identifications, human memory and perception, and I've also have 6 peer-reviewed studies on the nature of witness lineups.
Okay, well, since those published studies deal with witness lineups, could you walk us through what one of those experiments might look like?
Yeah, the most basic one is the following. I will show some of my subjects a video of a crime that's happening. In that video, I will tell them that they're to identify who the perpetrator of these crimes are. Typically, I'll give them different instructions on either how to make that identification, or I'll divulge information to them about the crime itself. Then I'll split the subjects into two groups and basically see what impaired their memory and what improved them.
Do those sorts of changing variables actually affect how people remember events?
Sure, of course.
Okay, well, what sorts of materials or facts do you need when assessing the reliability of any given method?
Typically, you want things like records related to the memory itself, contextual records surrounding the circumstances of the memory, and any other records you may be able to find concerning the perception of that.
Did you have those sorts of records in this case?
Yes, I did.
And do you use reliable principles and methods when evaluating those records?
Yes, I did.
Did you do that here?
Yeah, I did.
Were you able to come to a conclusion in this case?
Yes.
Was it to a reasonable degree of scientific certainty?
Yes, it was.
What was your ultimate conclusion in today's case?
So after reviewing the facts of this case, I ultimately determined, based off the evidence I saw and based off my research, that Charlie Wilson's identification on July 11th, 2022 was unreliable, as well as her
Objection.
identification.
Improper expert opinion, may I be heard?
I guess.
The witness just said that Charlie Wilson's ID was unreliable. This is invading the province of the jury, as it's their job to decide whether or not Charlie Wilson is reliable.
Doctor, would you mind explaining what your ultimate conclusion in this case was?
Sure, I'll keep it brief. I basically determined that Charlie Wilson's identification in this case on July 11th was unreliable, as well as her in-court identification today.
All right, well, doctor, I do want to talk about that, but first, are you aware of any other eyewitnesses in this case?
I am aware of one, yes.
Did you evaluate their reliability?
I did not evaluate the reliability.
Well, how does the existence of another eyewitness impact your evaluation of Charlie Wilson's reliability?
It doesn't. This individual, I believe, Carrie Smith, is a separate person from Charlie Wilson, so it doesn't ultimately influence my opinion in this case, which is about Charlie Wilson's eyewitness.
Okay. Well, doctor, I now want to get back to Ms. Wilson's identification and her memory. And I want to keep track of what might have been going through Ms. Wilson's mind during the attack. So I'm going to create a chart, track of what we're talking about. And I'm going to label the top of the chart, Charlie Wilson. All right, so doctor, would you first mind just explaining some factors that might make any given memory more unreliable?
Yeah, so things like stress, fear, divided attention, all of those things can contribute to a memory becoming more unreliable over time.
Okay. Now, were you able to review Charlie Wilson's testimony in preparing your opinion for this case?
Yes, I was.
Okay, well, let's go through some of the things together. At any point, was Ms. Wilson describing how she was feeling during the attack?
Yes, she described it as more afraid than she's ever been before.
Okay, I'm going to put in quotations, more afraid than ever under Charlie Wilson. Okay, and was Ms. Wilson ever describing her thought process during the attack?
Yes, I believe she said she could hardly think straight.
Okay, I'm going to add could hardly think straight in quotations. And now, Dr. Well, I'm down here anyways. Was there any time when she explained what her primary focus was during that attack?
Yes, I believe it was survival. She could think about this.
Okay, I'm going to add in quotations, survival. So, doctor, we can see that Ms. Wilson was feeling fear, divided attention, and was experiencing stress. from this and from her testimony in court today that the jury got to hear. Could you explain what these sorts of feelings and thoughts, what impact they could have on memory?
Yes, as I mentioned, stress, fear, divided attention, all of those things can influence the reliability of memory, in addition to things like short exposure time, etc. By contrast, when we're able to look at something for a longer period of time and really memorize it, that can create what is known as a process of rehearsal to create reliable memories. When these kind of factors are present, it can contribute to the unreliability.
And Your Honor, the defense would like to preserve this as defense demonstrative 1 proposal.
Okay.
I'm going to mark in the bottom right-hand corner, DD1. Okay. So, Doctor, I now want to move on and talk about the lineup as conducted in this case. What was your opinion about the lineup the police did?
Yes, after reviewing the lineup, I believe that it was the suggested one.
And Your Honor, may I put up a copy of that lineup? Sure. And may Dr. Lee step down and join me at the
Yes,
table?
of course.
Doctor, if you could come down. You know, Doctor, I'm in your way. Why don't you stand where I was while we go through this?
Sure.
So, Doctor, what makes any given lineup suggestive?
Yeah, so I think it's best to think about in terms of what an unsuggestive lineup would be. An unsuggestive lineup is one where a person could be given the same description that the witness gave and still only have a 1 in 6 chance of picking the potential attacker out of the lineup. By contrast, a suggestive lineup would be one where the witness might be told who the attacker is.
What do you mean by told who the attacker is?
Yeah, in essence, whether the lineup all but suggests who to pick out of the lineup.
And how does that play into your evaluation of this lineup?
So when I looked at this, I mean, for example, 1, to me, suggests it was Photoshop. 2, when you look at, for example, this one, the eye is too big for the head to be believable. And in essence, when I looked at this lineup, I thought that the lineup itself all but told Charlie Wilson who the attacker was.
Okay. Now, what can you tell this jury about confidence and memory?
Sure. So what we know is that our confidence in a memory, there's only a small to moderate correlation between confidence and accuracy in a memory. In other words, we can be more confident in something as time goes on, despite the fact that the accuracy of the memory doesn't change. And this is because there are things that are incorporated into our confidence about a memory that have nothing to do with the actual memory itself. For example, when we believe something over and over, that can influence the memory, despite the fact that the memory is not more accurate.
Okay, so what might it tell us if over time confidence goes from let's say medium to, apologies, doctor, bad question. What does potentially changing levels of confidence in a memory, what can that tell us about it?
Yes, it can tell us that memory is unreliable because we know that confidence is highest at the moment of identification, but the further in time you go, confidence doesn't generally increase, it should decrease.
Well, Your Honor, may I put up a copy of the first page of Exhibit 3?
Yeah.
Now, Doctor, was this part of the documents you reviewed in preparing for today?
Yeah, I reviewed the exhibits.
Okay. And who wrote this exhibit?
Charlie.
Okay. And so I'm reading here, I think it was his left eye, but can't really remember. What was Charlie Wilson's confidence about that left eye today?
I believe 100%.
Okay. So Doctor, you can retake your seat. Thank you. So Doctor, given the fear and stress that Ms. Wilson was experiencing, the suggestive nature of this lineup, and the changing confidence of Ms. Wilson over time, what does that tell you about her memory and the police lineup as conducted in this case?
Right. Ultimately, based on those things, I determined that Charlie Wilson's memory of July 11, 2022 was unreliable, as well as the lineup.
Thank you, Doctor. Your Honor, I pass the witness.
Cross-examination?
Yes, Your Honor.
Good afternoon, Dr. Lee.
Good afternoon.
As an expert, it's important to be impartial, right?
Correct.
It's important to look at the facts of the case that you're working on, right? It's important to look at those facts with an open mind, right?
Sure.
Let's talk about whether you looked at this case with an open mind. You've been hired to testify in 60 other trials, right?
Correct, I have.
Every single time with the defense.
Yes, they are the ones who hired me.
In those 60 other trials, you never told a jury that a lineup was reliable, have you?
No, I have not.
In those 60 other trials, you never told a jury that an eyewitness ID from a lineup was reliable.
No, I have not.
You're also hired to consult on cases, right?
Correct.
You've been hired to consult on about 1,000 other cases, right?
Yes.
Those cases have different victims,
Yes.
different police,
Yes.
different defendants,
Yes.
different lineups,
Yes.
different facts.
Yes.
In those 1,000 other cases, you never thought that a lineup was reliable.
Right, I don't believe eyewitness lineups are.
In those 1,000 other cases, you never thought a single eyewitness ID from a lineup was reliable?
No, lineups are problematic in my research, so no, I do not think lineups are reliable.
Every year, there are thousands of cases around the country that involve police lineups, right?
Correct.
You're not involved in all of those cases, right?
No, I'm not.
You don't know the facts of all of those cases, right?
Right, no.
Doc, you haven't researched all of those cases, right?
No, of course not.
Yet you still think that all of those lineups are unreliable?
Right, it's about the procedure of the lineup itself.
So let's get this right. Your opinion will always be that a lineup is unreliable?
Based on the research I've done thus far, yes.
Let's talk about whether there was anything wrong with this lineup. A moment ago, you told the jury that you thought this lineup looked suggestive, right?
Yes.
Your words were, to me, it looks like number one is Photoshop.
Yeah, I have.
That's your opinion, right?
Correct, I mean, yes.
Charlie Wilson didn't say that to her it looked Photoshop, right?
No, she did not say that.
You were in court today.
Correct?
You heard Charlie Wilson say that she was shocked to find out that these images were artificial intelligence, right?
Right, that's what she said.
When she looked through this lineup, she chose the defendant as the man who robbed her, right? Let's talk about whether her description matches the defendant. Because before Charlie Wilson did the lineup, she had already given a description to the police of the robber, right?
Yes, I believe that's true.
She had described the robber to the police about 30 minutes after she was robbed, true?
That's right.
Charlie Wilson described the robber as a white male, right?
Right.
Publishing Exhibit 1. The defendant, he's a white male, right?
Right.
Charlie Wilson described the robber as in his mid-30s or 40s, right?
Right.
The defendant was 33.
Right.
Charlie Wilson described the robber as having some facial hair, right?
Yes, I believe that's right.
The defendant, he's got some facial hair, right?
Right.
Charlie Wilson described the robber as wearing an orange t-shirt and blue jeans, right?
Yes.
When the defendant was arrested, he was wearing an orange t-shirt and blue jeans, right?
Yes, from my review, that's accurate.
Charlie Wilson described the robber as having something wrong with one of his eyes, right?
Correct.
The defendant has something wrong with one of his eyes, right?
Right.
Charlie Wilson described the robber as looking like that eye didn't quite work, right?
Right.
The defendant's eye is completely blind, isn't it?
What?
The defendant's left eye is completely blind.
Yes, I believe you said there was an eye problem, yes.
Well, I'm not asking you if there was an eye problem. I'm asking you if that eye doesn't work.
Sure, yes.
Every description that we just talked about that Charlie Wilson gave of the robber was before she ever saw a photo of the defendant, right?
Yes, I believe that's true.
Every description that Charlie Wilson gave of the robber that we just talked about was before the defendant's photo was even taken.
Yes, I believe so.
Thank you. Pass the witness.
Redirect.
Yes, Your Honor. Now, Dr. Lee, the opposing counsel just told you a second ago that Ms. Wilson never found anything off about photo number 1. I want to give you a chance to review something that you reviewed in preparation for this case, and actually have the same question. And Your Honor, may I approach this witness with, and for opposing counsel, I'm referring to lines 32 of the testimony of Charlie Wilson, line 2 and 3. Dr. Lee, if you can read along silently, please, or just lines 2 through 3. Okay. So based off what we just read, was there anything Charlie Wilson said about her thoughts on photo number 1?
Yeah, right. It looked like it was Photoshopped.
And to be clear,
Objection to hearsay?
Your Honor, if I may respond, this witness's expert opinion is entirely on the reliability of Charlie Wilson's memory.
What's your response to hearsay?
Yes, Your Honor, as an expert witness, he's allowed to disclose those sorts of things. So, Doctor, when you said that this man's eye patch looks photoshopped or something, are those your words?
That's hers.
Whose?
Those are Charlie Wilson's words, yes.
Okay, great. Nothing further, Your Honor. Pass the witness.
Okay, thank you. You can sit down. Any other witnesses?
Yes, Your Honor, this time the defense calls Carrie Smith. Stand.
All right, Smith, come on up. So she sits down, you may proceed. Thank you, Your Honor.
All right, Ms. Smith. Can you please introduce yourself to the members of the jury?
Hi, my name is Carrie Smith.
What do you do for a living?
So I'm a student, I'm a senior at Central State Technical College, and then I also work part-time.
Why'd you choose Central State Technical College?
I really wanted to play college basketball, and CSTC kind of became my only option.
Why do you say CSTC became your only option?
Well, back in 2020, I pled guilty to a misdemeanor for making a false statement to a law enforcement officer.
Let's talk about that, Ms. Smith. Can you tell the members of the jury about the incident that led up to that misdemeanor?
Sure. So I had really big dreams of playing D1 Division I college basketball. And so when I was 18, I was on a recruiting visit to a really good basketball school. And one of the nights on my visit, some of my would-be future teammates took me out to a bar, and something happened in the bar. And as we were leaving, the group I was with, we were jumped by a group of people. One of them pulled a gun on us, and one of the guys I was with, Tyler Flowers, who all played for the basketball team, he pulled out his own gun and he shot and killed one of the individuals that jumped us.
How did this situation lead to you being charged with a misdemeanor?
When the police asked me about what happened, they asked me if I saw who did it, and I gave them a general description of somebody. I said I didn't know who did it, and then I picked somebody random out of a lineup.
Why would you lie to the police about who shot that man?
It was the clearest case of self-defense that anybody could ever see. Tyler, if he wouldn't have acted that night, I don't know if I would be here today. I was just trying to cover for him and look out for him.
Objection, Your Honor, to bolster. May I be heard?
No, why don't you move along, Counselor?
Absolutely. Your Honor.
Well, let me ask you this, are you gonna try to attack this witness's credibility based on this prior conviction?
Absolutely, Your Honor.
Then
The
I'm gonna let
procedure,
her answer all the questions. Go ahead.
Thank you, Your Honor. Ms. Smith, given that story you just told us, why should any members of this jury trust the testimony that you're going to give today, knowing that you lied to the police before?
That lie ruined my life. I had big dreams of playing college basketball. I was getting recruited by big schools, so I was looking at NIL money, championship rings, maybe even a shot to play professional basketball. But once I had this criminal conviction, no school would even touch me, even look at me. So all of those dreams kind of just went up in smoke, and I regret it so much.
Now let's transition and talk about why you're testifying here today. You mentioned that in addition to school, you also work. Where do you work?
I work at the Gasco on Main Street as a clerk.
And what days do you typically work at the Gasco?
I work Saturday, Sunday, and Monday nights.
And is there a specific shift you typically work?
Yes, I work the graveyard shift, the 8 p.m. to midnight.
All right. And Ms. Smith, we're going to talk about something you witnessed in the Gasco, but first I want to ask you, have the police ever come into the Gasco asking to speak with you?
Yes, a few nights after this incident that happened, I was today talking about police came and tried to talk to me.
And what did you tell them?
I didn't tell them anything. I refused to talk to them.
Why wouldn't you speak to the police if you had something to say?
Given my history with law enforcement, I don't really think that they would trust me, and I frankly don't trust them. So I didn't really see a point.
Now let's talk about your job at the Gasco. Were you working on July 11th, 2022?
Yes, I was.
And what shift were you working?
The graveyard shift, like I usually do, 8 p.m. to midnight.
Now, why does that shift on July 11th stand out to you?
That was the night that the guy with the weird one eye came in.
All right. No, we'll talk about that man in more detail, but I want to talk about how you were feeling during that shift. What were you doing at around 11 p.m.?
So it was a slow shift like it usually is. So I was watching YouTube videos on my phone when the headlights alerted me. I looked outside.
And what were these headlights from?
These headlights from a car that had parked at one of the pubs close to the gas station.
When you looked outside, what, if anything, did you see?
I saw a man get out of the passenger side of a car, and it looked like he was yelling at the driver. And the driver looked like she was just, or whoever it was looking down at the floorboards.
And after the man got out of the car, where did he go?
He came inside to the gas station.
So the man comes inside. What do you notice?
As soon as he walks into the door, it just seems off. The guy just seems really jittery. He's walking around the gas station. He keeps looking back at that car he came out of, checking on what's going on outside. The whole situation, it just felt weird.
What was he doing specifically inside the gas station?
He was picking up random things for weird amounts of time. He picked up some motor oil and looked at it and then put it back. He went to the back of the gas station, looked at the drinks, took out a beer, put it back, and then he walked up to the counter where I was.
What did he do when he got to the counter?
He just handed me a debit card.
How did you react?
It was weird because he didn't bring anything up to the counter to buy. So I asked him what he wanted.
What did he say?
He said he wanted some Lucy's.
Well, what are Lucy's, Ms. Smith?
Lucy's are just single cigarettes.
And are single cigarettes like Lucy's legal to sell?
Not exactly, but we sell them anyways.
So he asked for Lucy's. Was there anything else that the man wanted to buy?
Yes, he also wanted to buy some lottery tickets.
Now, did you ring this man up for the Lucy's and the lottery tickets?
So because Lucy's aren't legal technically, I didn't ring up for the Lucy's, but I did ring him up for the lottery tickets.
And would there have been a receipt from this transaction?
There should be, yes.
If there was, about what time would that receipt have shown?
Around 11 p.m.
So you made the sale What happened next?
And so, he tried to pay with the debit card before, so when I handed him back the debit card, I told him he needed to put it into the machine and type in his PIN, and instead he just put it away and handed me cash. And so after the sale, he walked towards the door.
Did he leave?
No, he stood at the door for a minute and then he turned around and walked back to the counter where I was.
Now, when you see this man coming back towards you, what are you thinking?
So the whole time I felt very weird about the situation, but when he turned back and came to the counter, that's when I really started paying attention. My adrenaline really started racing.
What were you doing when the man got back up to the counter?
I was looking directly at him.
What did the man want?
He asked me if I knew anybody that was holding.
How did you respond to that?
I said I didn't know what he was talking about. And then he left.
All right. Now, I want to dig into the details of this interaction with you and the man up at the counter. Would it be helpful for you to demonstrate the setup of the gas scope?
Yes.
Your Honor, may Ms. Smith step down off the stand just so we can demonstrate? All right, Ms. Smith, if we assume that something like this is the counter at the gas scope, can you show us where you would be standing behind the counter?
Yes. Probably about right here.
And how far away were you from the man when he was standing at the counter and making the sale?
No more than 3 feet.
So if I stood right about here, would that be right?
Yeah.
All right. And as you're standing across the counter from this man, what are you doing?
I'm staring at his face, trying to memorize every part of it.
Sure, you get a lot of customers. Why did you want to remember this man's face?
Well, the whole time he was in the gas and go, he was freaking me out. And so after he came back to the counter and my adrenaline was going, I thought maybe he was going to try and do something to me. So I wanted to remember what he looks like.
And how long were the two of you standing just feet away from each other that night?
2 to 3 minutes.
All right. Thank you, Ms. Smith. You can take your seat. Now let's talk about what you noticed about this man's face when you were standing just feet away from him. What jumps out to you about that man's face in your memory?
Definitely his eye.
When you say his eye, what do you mean?
So his right eye was really caved in or swollen. It looked almost like there wasn't even an eye there.
Right. And to be clear, Ms. Smith, which eye did it look like was sunken into this man's head?
It was his right eye.
Your Honor, permission to approach Ms. Smith, who was previously admitted as Exhibit 2. Ms. Smith, showing you one of the photos of Exhibit 2, do you recognize the person in this photo?
Yes, I do.
Who is it?
This is the defendant, Marcus Wallace.
And we're publishing Exhibit 2 to the jury. Ms. Wilson, how do you know, besides seeing him in court today, what Marcus Wallace looks like?
I saw a news article with this guy's picture. The news article was about they found they were trying this guy for a robbery and kidnapping related to the gas and go where I work, and so that's how I saw him first.
So how can you be so sure that it wasn't Marcus Wallace inside the gas station that night?
Well, as you can see from this picture, Marcus Wallace has something wrong with his left eye. The guy that I saw that night at the gas and go had something wrong with his right eye. And plus, Marcus Wallace, his left eye, you can see that there's an eye there. The guy that I saw, his right eye, it was so swollen or sunken in, it looked like there wasn't even an eye there. It was definitely nothing like this.
So how confident are you, Ms. Smith, as you sit here today, that the defendant, Marcus Wallace, is not the person you saw in the gas station that night?
I'm 100% confident. I know it's not him. They got the wrong guy.
Thank you, Ms. Smith. Pass the witness, Your Honor. Cross-examination.
Yes, Your Honor. May I proceed?
Yes, please.
Good afternoon, Ms. Smith.
Good afternoon.
I want to start by getting a description of the man who came into your gas station that night. Now, he was male,
Yes.
white,
Yes.
30s or 40s.
Yes.
He had something wrong with one of his eyes.
Yes.
6'2",
Yes.
looked to be average built.
Yes.
He was wearing an orange shirt.
He was.
He made a purchase that night, right?
Yes, he did.
He bought cigarettes,
Yes.
not a pack of cigarettes.
No.
He bought loose cigarettes.
Yes.
You remember the brand?
Yes, Camel, it's like the most popular brand of cigarettes.
Hold on, Ms. Smith. Are you testifying that you know what the most popular brands of cigarettes are in the country?
I guess I wouldn't characterize it as most popular, but Camels are a pretty common brand.
You sold him Camel cigarettes,
Yes, I did.
loose Camel cigarettes,
Yes,
5 loose Camel cigarettes.
yes,
But you're saying that man was not the defendant. That's your testimony?
yes.
Ms. Smith, let's talk about why you're saying. You don't like the police, do you?
I do not.
The day after a man with an eye condition came into your store, you heard the police were looking for a man with an eye condition, didn't you?
Yes, high spot for that.
But that day, you didn't come forward with what you'd seen.
No,
That week, you didn't come forward with what you'd seen.
no,
Not that month.
no,
Ms. Smith, you didn't come forward for 10 months, right?
yes,
And when you did come forward, you didn't go to the police.
no, I don't trust the police.
In fact, the police came to you.
They did.
Detective Drew asked you if you knew anything, right?
She asked to speak with me, yes.
And you refused to speak with him.
Yes, sir, I did.
And when you decided you were ready to talk about what you'd seen 10 months later, you didn't go to the detective who tried to speak with you.
No, I did not.
You went to the defense attorneys, right?
Yeah, because they had the wrong guy. I wanted to help.
You went to the defense attorneys, right?
Yes, sir.
Ms. Smith, this is not the first time you've made an identification in a criminal case, is it?
That's correct. It is not.
In 2020, you witnessed a shooting.
Yes,
You told the police you didn't know who the shooter was.
yes, I did.
That was a lie.
It was. a
You
lie.
gave the police a description of the shooter,
I did.
and that was a lie too.
Yes,
And then there's something you didn't tell us on direct examination. Ms. Smith, you went in for a lineup, right?
I accept that.
During that lineup, you pointed at one of the men as the shooter.
Yes,
You pointed at an innocent man.
I did.
You pointed at a man that you knew at the time was innocent.
Yes, sir.
And you told the police they had killed someone.
Yes,
You pled guilty to a crime.
yes,
You pled guilty to making a false statement to law enforcement.
yes, sir, I did.
Ms. Smith, let's compare what you did then to what you're doing now. In that shooting case, you were trying to help your friend.
Yes,
In that shooting case, you lied to help your friend.
yes,
You made a false identification to help your friend.
yes.
Here today, you're trying to help the defendant.
Marcus Wallace is not my friend, and I'm trying to help an innocent.
Ms. Smith, that was not my question. Here today, you're trying to help the defendant, yes or no?
Yes.
Ask the witness.
No redirect. Your Honor, may this witness step down?
Yes, you're all done. You may step down. Does the defendant have any other witnesses?
No further witnesses, Your Honor. At this point, the defense rests, sir.
All right, you guys ready for closing arguments?
Yes, Your Honor.
We request a recess, Your Honor.
Okay, I'll give you guys 5 minutes. Thank you, Your Honor. Give the room. That's everybody.
No.
I think the other jury went down to update her parking.
Oh, okay.
Maybe a minute.
You guys can be seated.
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, now we have everybody. Prosecution for the state, you may proceed with closing. Yes, sir. And are you allowed, closing and then rebuttal time?
Yes, Your Honor.
Are you reserving your time for some time for rebuttal?
Yes, Your Honor, the remainder of my time that I can use.
Okay, very nice. You may proceed.
Charlie Wilson is driving. First stop sign. She looks over. She sees his face. She sees his eye. It's the defendant. Second stop sign. She looks over. His face, his eye, it's the defendant. Third stop sign. It's the defendant. Fourth stop sign. Fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth. She's burning his face into her mind. It's the defendant. It's the defendant. It's the defendant. Then the defendant gets out of the car, leaves the door open so the light is illuminating his face, and she stares at him. For 2 minutes. It's the defendant. When the defendant left that car, he left his mark on the money. You saw how traumatized Charlie Wilson was today. Unable to get the image of the defendant's face out of her mind. He left his mark on her. That's how you know it was the defendant. Because the defendant left his mark. We had the burden today. We had to prove to you the defendant's guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. And there were 3 pieces of evidence that showed you how we met our burden. His profile, his property, his print. So let's take those one by one, starting with his profile. Every time Charlie Wilson looked to her right, she saw the left side of the defendant's face, his profile. Then when he got out of the car, she saw his whole face. She studied it. Then in court today, she pointed to the defendant and said, "That's him. That's the guy who robbed me. I'm positive." But the defense today told you don't trust Charlie Wilson. First, they told you don't trust Charlie Wilson because she was scared. Members of the jury, just because she was scared doesn't mean she didn't see his face. She saw his face at every single stop sign. 4 there, 4 on the way back, 8 times total. Then for 2 minutes when he was standing outside of the car. But then the defense said, don't trust Charlie Wilson because it was dark outside. not when the defendant's face was completely illuminated. And she was staring at it. Quote, I saw him perfectly. The defense told you, don't trust Charlie Wilson because the lineup used AI. It was totally suggestive. But members of the jury, that's not even true. Charlie Wilson had no idea that those images were AI. She thought they were real people. She told you that on the stand. Charlie Wilson didn't pick the defendant out of that lineup because he was the only person who looked real. Charlie Wilson picked the defendant out of that lineup because he was the robber. And remember why investigator Drew used AI in that lineup in the first place. Because she looked for hours through DMV photos, through mugshots, through the entire database, looking for someone to match the description of the robber. But the only person who matched the description of the robber was this defendant. Nobody else even looks like this guy. But then the defense told you, don't trust Charlie Wilson because our expert said that she's unreliable. But members of the jury, ask yourselves, is their expert reliable? 1,000 other cases, different victims, different police, different defendants, different lineups, different facts, but always comes to the same conclusion, can't trust the eyewitness. That's what he tells every jury, not just you guys, can't trust the eyewitness. In fact, he already knows what he's going to say in his next case. Can't trust the eyewitness. Because his opinion is so biased that it will quite literally always be the exact same. But there was a moment in today's trial that showed you how biased their expert really is. On cross-examination, I asked their expert, did Charlie Wilson say that that image looked photoshopped? He said, no, Charlie Wilson didn't say that. But then on redirect, when opposing counsel asked, did Charlie Wilson say that image looked photoshopped? He said, yes, Charlie Wilson did say that. Members of the jury, that is the definition of a hired gun. This guy will say anything that the defense asks him to say. And that's exactly why they hired him. Because his opinion will always be the same. You can't trust him. But you can trust Charlie Wilson. Because if Charlie Wilson was close enough to the defendant to study his profile from just 3 feet away, closer than I am to you right now, close enough to smell him. She was close enough to identify him. That brings us to the second piece of evidence that proves it was the defendant, his property. The robber, he was wearing an orange t-shirt and blue jeans. The defendant, when he was arrested, wearing an orange t-shirt and blue jeans. But the defense, they called Carrie Smith today to tell you, no. This was a different guy, also with the bad eye, also wearing an orange t-shirt. But it wasn't the defendant. Members of the jury, remember why Carrie Smith is here today. Because Carrie Smith is trying to help this defendant. Think about what happened last time. She tried to help somebody who had just committed a crime. She lied. The last time she was trying to help someone who committed a crime, she lied to the police. The last time she was trying to help someone, she made a false statement. The last time she was trying to help someone, she was so willing to lie that she pointed to a man that she knew was innocent. and said that he killed somebody. And you know that Cary Smith is lying because of his property. Cary Smith had to admit the robber bought loose Camel cigarettes. See, that's weird because gas stations, they sell packs of cigarettes, not loosies. But what did the defendant have? Loose Camel cigarettes. But that's not all. You know Cary Smith is lying because of that receipt. That receipt that places the defendant at the Gasco, at the place of the robbery, on the date that the robbery occurred. Why? Because the defendant was there. Because it's him. But that brings us to the third piece of evidence, his print. When the defendant left that money in the car, he left his mark on that money. You see, that money wasn't in the car when he got in, but it was there when he got out, so we know it came from the defendant. Today, opposing counsel tried to tell you that this was a rushed investigation, leads to a result that can't be trusted. But members of the jury, the computer wasn't rushed. It was a computer. That print was ran through the FBI database. Whose print was the #1 match? The defendant's. They said this was a rushed investigation. The computer had no stake in this case. The computer didn't know where this crime occurred. But somehow, when the computer was asked, who's the #1 match? Out of 72 million people, 72 million fingerprints. It's the defendant. The computer didn't know the description of the robber. But when the computer was asked whose fingerprint is the #1 match, it just happened to be some guy with a bad eye. They kept telling you that this investigation was rushed, but they had 2 independent experts confirm that result. Yeah, it's the defendant's print. You see, some places they say 8 points of similarity is enough to determine a match. Even stricter places, they say 12 points of similarity is enough to determine a match. The defendant's print, this print, 48. So let's put it all together. Because so far we've only talked about the evidence in isolation. The robber, white, male, mid-30s or 40s, some facial hair. The defendant, white, male, 30s, some facial hair. The robber, orange t-shirt, blue jeans, smelled like cigarettes. The defendant, orange t-shirt, blue jeans, smelled like cigarettes. The robber bought cigarettes. The defendant had cigarettes. The robber had something wrong with one of his eyes. The defendant has something wrong with one of his eyes. The robber looks like that eye doesn't work. The defendant, one of his eyes doesn't work. When Charlie Wilson described the robber before the lineup, before ever seeing the defendant's photo, it matched the defendant. Then when she did the lineup, it's the defendant. Then in court today, it's the defendant. When the computer was asked out of 72 million fingerprints, whose is the #1 match, it's the defendant. When the first expert was asked to confirm that result, it's the defendant. When the second expert triple checked that result, it's the defendant. Members of the jury, we have proven beyond a reasonable doubt, it's the defendant. In a moment, you'll get to look at the verdict. Count 1 is robbery. We had to prove that the defendant stole the victim's property. We proved that the defendant stole her ID, her debit card. We had to prove the defendant threatened the imminent use of force. The defendant held a knife to the victim's throat and said, "I will kill you." We had to show that there was a weapon, a deadly weapon. The defendant had a knife. So when you get to that verdict form, you can put a check mark next to guilty for count 1. Count 2 is kidnapping. Now, this isn't what you usually think of when you think of kidnapping. But as the judge will instruct you, when someone abducts someone under the threat of imminent force, that's kidnapping. So when the defendant jumped in the victim's car, held a knife to her throat, said, "If you try to escape, I'm going to kill you," that's kidnapping. So you can put a check mark next to guilty for count 2. The defendant, he tried to avoid leaving his mark. He knew how unique his face looked, how distinct and unique that eye looked. That's why he told Charlie Wilson, "If you even glance at me, I'm going to kill you." But Charlie Wilson looked at the defendant anyway, not for her safety. She knew if she did, she was putting herself in harm's way. But for today, to bring the man who did this to her to justice. And members of the jury, that was brave. You should believe her. Find the defendant guilty. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Ms. Freeman, close the argument.
Yes, Your Honor, sorry, starting at 7:00. Ready to proceed, Your Honor.
Okay, go ahead.
Less than 48 hours. Less than 2 days. That's how long it took from police showing up at the scene to charging Marcus Wallace with that. What did they miss? Well, they had 5 fingerprint matches. Only went to 1. They had to create a lineup, but they couldn't be bothered to find real people, so they just threw something together. They didn't consider other eyewitnesses. They didn't pursue the physical evidence that they collected. A rushed investigation that leaves open questions cannot be trusted. And we're going to talk about the problems in this investigation. But before we do, I want to be clear about what we're saying and what we're not saying. And when Miss Wilson got up there on the stand and she told you that she believes the defendant did this to her, we are not saying she lied. I genuinely believe that she believes that. I genuinely believe that over the past 15 months, she's become convinced that's true. Miss Wilson's not a bad person. She's not a liar. She's just wrong in the statement. Well, they need you to believe that she's right. Because they didn't just have to prove that a robbery happened. They didn't just have to prove that a kidnapping occurred. They had to prove beyond any and all reasonable doubt that it was Marcus Wallace who committed those crimes, and they failed to do so. Because you have to ask yourselves, what creates reasonable doubt in a case like this? It's three things, really. An eyewitness who saw someone who was not the defendant, the changing memory of their eyewitness, and the fingerprints they never bothered to look at. Let's start with Carrie Smith, that eyewitness that saw someone who was not the defendant. Now, what she told you is important because she saw someone with a messed up right eye. Someone came into the gas and go that night who was not the defendant, because the details just don't line up. Carrie Smith saw someone who had a messed up right eye, wearing a different shirt, entirely contrary to what Miss Wilson told. Now, you heard about a receipt today that supposedly disproves what Miss Wilson said, but think about the receipt and the investigation the state put into it. Now, all that receipt tells you is that it was from the Gas and Go, and it was on July 11th of 2022. Nothing else, because the rest of it was illegible. And when the officer decided, hey, this is worth looking into, all she did was go to the Gas and Go, talk to someone who all she knew was a random store clerk, and when she didn't get an answer about it, she just gave up. Didn't call a manager, didn't try to do anything else. She told you that she could have subpoenaed those records, but she chose not to. So we don't know much about that receipt. We don't know if it was from earlier that day. We don't know if it was with a debit card in Marcus Wallace's name for something that wasn't lottery tickets. We just don't know anything about it. That just keeps happening. The state found evidence, but just didn't take one more step that would have actually gotten answers, because they weren't looking for answers. They were looking to confirm an assumption that it was the defendant, Marcus Wallace, who committed this crime. That's why it only took them 48 hours. That's why it only took them less than 2 days to do a complete and thorough investigation. Let's talk about Miss Wilson. Again, Miss Wilson is not lying, but memory isn't perfect, and you need to doubt hers. Because just 30 minutes after the attack, she wrote, I think it was his left eye, but can't really remember. Less than 30 minutes after this crime occurred, she wasn't sure. Now, Miss Gaskins, when she was up here, she said something that I wrote down, that Miss Wilson during this time was thinking, it's the defendant, it's the defendant, it's the defendant. Except when it wasn't. Because just 30 hours after the crime, when she was first shown this lineup, she thought that this fake person, this man with a full beard, an entirely normal looking left eye, and a right eye you can't even see, could have been her attacker. None of those features are in common with the defendant, folks. And it's not just that with Miss Wilson, because her confidence in her memory has just changed over time. 30 minutes after the crime, couldn't really remember. 30 hours after, thought it might have been someone else. But now, 15 months later, she has been convinced it's the defendant, it's the defendant, it's the defendant. So when she got up on the stand, she told you, I am 100% confident it was the defendant who attacked me. I am 100% confident it was my attacker's left eye. But Dr. Lee told you that when confidence increases over time, reliability decreases. And now I want to also make something clear. Ms. Gaskins got up here and told you that Dr. Lee was a hired gun, that he was paid the big bucks to tell us whatever we wanted. Except we aren't paying Dr. Lee. He volunteered to do this for free because the job the state did was just that bad. Because let's think about the lineup that Miss Wilson actually had to do and how that didn't really help her memory either. Folks, not one of these people looks remotely alike. And that's because they aren't people. They are fakes, and they're not just fakes, they are bad fakes. Because they're just made up. A computer made these up. I mean, we already talked about this one, but it looks like a pirate with a badly photoshopped eye patch. Number 5, when you go back there, look at number 5, look at his eye, look how big it is. It even has dimples in it. It might as well be a golf ball. And even if when you look at it, you say, some of those could be real people. Even the best of the bad fakes looks like Edgar Allan Poe. Folks, the state threw this together, something they knew no one would think looks good, and are acting like it's a victory when Miss Wilson, of course, chose the only real person in the entire lineup. That's the level of police work the state's asking you to trust. And you shouldn't. Leads us to those fingerprints that the police didn't look at. Now, when the investigator got up on the stand, she explained some of how fingerprinting works. She told you that she collected the fingerprint and ran it through an AFIS database, an FBI database with over 72 million people in it. And that database does a lot of work for you. It compares a fingerprint with those 72 million other people, and it narrows it down to just 5. Just 5 that you have to look at in order to make a match. But she didn't even do that. She looked at 1. And they've gone on and on about how 48 points of similarity, that's enough, that's definitive, it couldn't have been any higher. Or, apologies, none of the other fingerprints could have been a match. Oh, and the detective was asked, well, it's possible that those other 4 fingerprints would have had points of similarity, right? She had to agree. And she was asked, well, it could have been 5. She had to agree. Could have been 45. She had to agree. Because the only way to know for sure is if she had done her job and looked. So there's some questions that the state just can't answer. How many points of similarity did the second check? The 3rd, the 4th, the 5th? Don't know, because they can't tell you. They also can't tell you what any of those other 4 matches look like. Did any of them have a major right eye problem, matching the description that Carrie Smith gave you? Maybe someone matching this man or close to, explaining why Miss Wilson's memory was a little confused? Maybe. I don't know. The state doesn't know because they didn't check. Over and over again, they stopped just 1 step before doing a good job. And instead, they're trying to ask you to fill in the gaps left by their investigation. And you should. Because throughout trial, I've been writing down some questions that have just been unanswered. Now, going back to that receipt for just a second. Now, with the receipt, if they had done the label, if they'd gotten a subpoena, if they looked at that receipt, there's basically 2 things it could have told us. 1, maybe the receipt would have shown lotto tickets at 11 p.m. matching the story Carrie Smith told you. Or maybe that receipt would have shown that Marcus Wallace bought something at a different time, earlier that day, maybe with a card in his own name. Again, we don't know because the state didn't bother to check. But if they had, that would have disproved their entire theory. And we'll never know which it is because they didn't look. And there's other unanswered questions. How many points of similarity to the second? Was there a receipt with lotto tickets? Was there a receipt with Marcus Wallace's name on it, disproving their case? Would Charlie Wilson been able to pick out Marcus Wallace if he'd been in a lineup not filled with fakes? But that's because there's a real simple explanation for what could have happened here. Even if you believe everything the state's told you, this story that I'm about to say, we don't know if it's true. But imagine, you're Marcus Wallace, you have a $20 bill burning a hole in your pocket, and you decide, you know what, I'm gonna go get some snacks at the local gas station. I walk over, open the door, go inside. Let's say it's noon. Go up to the clerk, get whatever you want. You pay, let go of that $20 bill, leaving a fingerprint behind right on it. And then you leave. Never going back, never stepping another foot in that gas and go. But then later that evening during this crime, when someone comes into the gas station, that $20 bill is given as change. Then when the police look at it, they find a fingerprint of someone who is not the perpetrator of this crime. That is a story that can be true, even if you believe basically everything the state told. That is reasonable doubt. Irrespective of everything else that might be raising questions, even if you think, well, hey, maybe they did their jobs on this lineup. Maybe they did their jobs, apologies, on this witness identification. Maybe they did their jobs on the lineup. Maybe they did their jobs on the fingerprint. They had to disprove reasonable alternatives. And that's an alternative that they just can't deal with. Because they didn't do the legwork to find out. And they had to meet their burden. There is no burden on the defense. We could have sat down and not showed you anything. They just don't accept that. You might notice that during their closing argument, they were saying everything the defense is telling you to believe just isn't true. It's not reasonable. It's weird, doesn't make sense. But folks, in our criminal justice system, it's not just about finding someone, anyone to hold responsible for a crime. It's about finding the right person. And that's why they're held to the highest standard in our criminal justice system, beyond a reasonable doubt. That's higher than the burden the state would need to meet to take your children away. Because it's not just about finding the right person. It's also about protecting people like Mr. Wallace from the acts, omissions, mistakes, and just plain bad police work by the state. Because they rushed. 48 hours wasn't enough. So they missed things. And because they missed things, that might have answered your questions. You have to presume Marcus Wallace is innocent. Because they missed an eyewitness. Because they failed to line up with an even basic level of fairness. They didn't bother to look at 4 fingerprints when a computer had done well over 99.999% of their job. You cannot trust them to tell you who's guilty. So don't trust them. Make them do their job and hold them accountable for the bad work they did and find Mr. Wallace not guilty. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Rebuttal?
Yes, Your Honor. A moment ago, defense counsel told you that reasonable doubt in a case like this looks like 3 things. So let's walk through them one by one. Defense counsel told you that reasonable doubt in a case like this looks like an eyewitness who saw someone else. Their eyewitness is a convicted liar who you can't trust saw someone else. They told you reasonable doubt in a case like this looks like Charlie Wilson changing her memory. Members of the jury, Charlie Wilson's memory never changed. She described the robber. Then when she saw his face, she knew immediately it's him. Just because Charlie Wilson didn't remember every single detail about him. Just because someone doesn't remember every single detail about a person doesn't mean that when they see them again, they won't know exactly who they are. Defense counsel told you reasonable doubt in a case like this is the fingerprints they never bothered to look at. The defense told you about the 4 people who were never investigated. But members of the jury, reasonable doubt doesn't mean quadruple checking your work. The reason that the police never looked into those other people is because the defendant's print was confirmed by the computer, by the first expert, by the second expert. It's a match. His fingerprint had over triple the amount of points to declare a match. We've proven beyond a reasonable doubt that that fingerprint is his. The defendant left his mark. He is the right person. Find him guilty. Thank you.
This will now be submitted to the jury. You guys want to give us a few minutes, we'll fill out our ballots, and then be right back with you.
What would be like us to leave it around?
I don't care, okay? Do you guys care? We were just gonna do this on our phones.
Okay.
Shouldn't take long. I mean, you're free to leave though.
Oh, okay.
Like if you have to go to the bathroom or something, please feel free.
Of course, yeah. I still like
What's our round number? Final. Thank you.
So. Yes.
Yes, yeah, you're welcome.
I am gonna run to the restroom and then I'll be back and do the follow-up part.
I'll be leaving. I gotta go.
You gotta go.
Yeah.
You gotta,
Yes.
you're a big deal and you gotta get somewhere.
He is a
I gotta
big
go.
deal.
I gotta go.
He's got
Sure. There you go. It's a pretty cool system. You're right about that. I did it. You don't play pads. I think I saw a few.
And that's really powerful because your jurors frankly don't want to think that people are out there lying on people or doing bad jobs. You don't have to take on that burden. Not this time. And you were kind of there with your theme, so I thought that theme was very palpable. But presentations are great, and hopefully I'll see y'all in the future.
Hey y'all, I'm Casey Chadwick. I am a partner at a litigation boutique here in town called Hicks Thomas, and y'all do a really great job. I was assuming y'all can research and I'd hire any of y'all tomorrow. So really, bravo.
So do you have your resumes on?
But really.
I'll just go right to left because I agree with everything everyone else said. Be careful when you're crossing the witness, especially when you have the baby seal that was that witness. I mean, you just came off so just brash and the last bits of that cross. I was like, golly, be nicer to her. Goodness. Just do watch that. I think it's harder when you just kind of have to read the witness, What was your name again, Sydney? Okay, great job. Really, really loved your closing. Now I've been on the receiving end of some Judge Garrison rulings that I didn't like as well as I might have wanted to. But when the judge gives you something that you don't like, just cool the cucumber, just whatever, and I'll figure it out. Like at one point I kind of saw some things where I was like, all right, just everybody chill out over there. And that was just when y'all were making objections and maybe y'all weren't getting the ones you wanted. No big deal. But none of that stuff matters 9 times out of 10. So just water off the duck's back, keep going. What is your name? Jones, right? Love your closing. And I loved the whole theme of they rushed through this, and I'm gonna surround you with evidence at the end. I just was like, man, okay, they got all the goods. Loved your tone. I actually love this case because from the defense side, you want to seem cool, calm, collected. These crazies over here have just got it all wrong, flew off the handle. So just chef's kiss. Your opening, I love the little pacing. I mean, just your physicality was wonderful. I love your tone. I love your directs and crosses were great. Just really, really great job.
That's very good.
All right, that's me. I'm up. First off, my name is Tanya Garrison. I'm the judge of the 157th. I work in this building downstairs. I try nothing but civil cases, in case you aren't familiar with this county. Number one, I'm really a lot nicer than I am.
She is.
I do it on purpose. You guys, look, you're at the height. This is the finals of a huge tournament.
Yep.
I can sit here and be nice and like just, be, what's it, kid gloves or whatever. I could do that. But what are you gonna learn from that? Nothing. And let me tell you, there's a whole lot more judges that are mean than that are nice.
Yep.
And it's not even that they're mean, it's that you feel that they're mean. And they're not agreeing with you. You have to be ready, you have to be trained for that. Because it is not natural. It is, I've never ruled against you, except for every single time you did it in front of me. But you have to get used to the hard parts of this job. Like you're gonna be in front of a court one day and you're gonna be so nervous and beads of sweat are gonna start dripping down your back.
Yeah.
And it's all you're gonna think about. Yeah. And you still have to play it off like nothing's happening. And you only learn that from practice. So I agree with everyone. All of you were amazing. I just finished trying a case this week. It was $1 billion injury case with some of the best trial lawyers, not only in this state, in this country. Any one of you could hang with them right now. I mean, you're not better than them, but you could hang with them. Never, ever underestimate your abilities in this profession, any of you. Now, that being said, were you perfect? None of you were perfect. I think we've identified a lot of stuff, but I'm going to tell you what my chief complaint is about all of you. And this is advice for going forward in mock trial, but also in real life. Every single one of you have what I call mock trial voice. You sound so rehearsed, so robotic, so just, it's insincere. It makes you look cold. It is what all these people were saying that you guys were doing It's because you've got it so memorized that you can't even break from it. Now, in examinations, you would break from it because you had to, and all of a sudden, it was like you went from an 11 to a 6, and everybody in the room it's like everybody went, oh, here's the real you. And I like the real you. I don't like the actor you. I mean, you're not doing a dramatic poetry reading, okay? You're arguing for somebody's life. You're arguing to put a dangerous person in prison. You've got to practice. You got to get rid of that. I don't know how to do it. I don't know the best way to do it. You also are not the only mock trial students that do that. Y'all do. Everybody. I'm sure these are all other mock trial students out here. They all do it. In the real world, if you start doing it, the thing that you're going to lose is credibility, because it's not yourself. The jury wants to believe in you, and if you are fake, they don't care what you have to say at all after that. The second you lose your credibility, never get it back. So be very careful about that. Be careful. The number one complaint I get from jurors in the jury room after trials are over is, why do lawyers repeat themselves so much? You guys repeated yourselves so much, and you do not have to prove your case through every single witness. You acted with each of your witnesses, all of you did this, like they were the only witness. They're not the only witness. You're telling a cohesive story through all of your witnesses. You don't need to be repeating back and forth. We didn't need to go over with every witness that the statement or the guy with the faked eye patch. And we covered that with every single person. You don't need to do that. I think this is all a good lesson in, and I know you're probably not listening to me because Judge Weaves is out here with the trophies, which means I know who won. And that's what you really want to know. But take this to heart. Just because you can do something doesn't mean you should, okay? Now, in mock trial, you gotta listen to your coaches. They know this better than I do, 100 times over. I know you have to do things to show off, to prove that you know, to prove that you can do it. That's a mock trial thing. In the real world, you always have to have your eye on the big picture, see the forest for the trees. You did a great job, Ms. Gaskins, on passing the first witness and not doing redirect. You did it too. I don't have any redirect. You don't have to have the last word. So the maturity it takes to do that as a lawyer, especially somebody who likes to hear themselves talk, showed me a lot, okay? You objected to the experts, okay? And I know I ruled harshly against you, but you didn't need to make those objections, because especially the first one you made, you knew that this guy was gonna be able to establish his qualifications. You knew that he was gonna be able to have the testimony. So you objected to it, and you should have done that in the beginning. She was right, not at the second part, but by drawing attention to that, you reinforce it, okay? And you objected twice. So 2 times you said, this guy is not qualified, and I basically told you to sit down. The jury, who always loves the judge, just heard the judge tell you you're wrong and he's qualified. So instead of discrediting him, you've just propped him back up. Okay, so just because you can, and you were right on those objections, doesn't mean you should. The objection on whether or not his ultimate opinion went to on her credibility, that was really good cross-examination for you to have with him, not necessarily a great objection. When you are examining and cross-examining a witness, know that as an expert, know that the difference between what's grounds to strike an expert and grounds to cross-examine an expert are very rarely the same thing. And when you object, you're just drawing more attention to it. You guys both made good asked and answered objections, both of which I overruled. These were the right objections to make because you needed to break up the testimony. Okay, it was the other side was getting in a rhythm, and you just needed to break it up. Now, as a practice point, asked and answered is a dumb objection. Until everybody in the room, it's so cringy you can't handle it anymore. Okay, because that's the only time I'm going to sustain it. Cumulative, even speculation to a certain extent. These are objections that a judge is never gonna get overturned on appeal for overruling, so they almost always do. Who cross-examined your expert? One of you guys did. You did, okay. You did a great job of cross-examining that expert. I would have loved, but I know you probably can't do this in mock trial, but you can do this in real life. It is a lesson on sitting down when you need to. You had a point where you go, so you have found that it's always unreliable. A witness identification is always unreliable. I mean, like, you had him and he just admitted it. And I would have loved if you would have just walked around and stood there and said, I don't have any more questions. I think we've made all of our points with this witness. You kept going because you had more in your script, right? So I want you to work on knowing when to stop, okay? Because again, you can't do that in mock trial, but in the real world, that would have been so dramatic. And we all would have been like, yes.
Yeah.
It scares him. What happens to the whole advice on feedback?
That was advice. That's all. Advice is how to improve in the future in your life, not only about trial. Feedback is let me be specific about things you did right and did wrong.
Okay, none of that was specific.
Well, no, those were examples as to just because you can, that's what you should. Want me to do it again?
Keep it rolling. Stay, keep it rolling. You sure?
Well, I have some critique of you, but no.
Congratulations, everyone. Thank you, judges, so much for your time.
You just pulled out some stuff, is that cool? Alright, will we find out where y'all went to school too?
Yeah, you're not too sure. All right, so first we have outstanding advocates in the final round. Ty, I could have spent more time here for ties, but I'm not going to because I would just paint more stuff and buy more gavels, and I probably have to do that. So the outstanding advocates in the final round come from Peter Jones with UCLA and we'll get another lovingly painted thing. I'm gonna send this one home with you because I have to go to Baylor for NTC, but I will bring you yours.
Okay, so UCLA and Baylor.
UCLA and Baylor?
Yes.
This isn't hard.
No, it's not hard. And so very, very competitive round, very, very close final. Came down to split balance, which is what you want to see in the final round when the level of competition is high. But the 2023 Tournament Champions winner is Baylor. You need to get your own plaque.
See?
You get a
Very
trophy.
good match.
You need to come up and take a picture.
I mean, it was just committees. Yay.
Thank you.
Yo.
You're getting.
Yep, don't shake your hands, yeah. Don't be good. Don't break things.
Don't break your words.
Congratulations.
Very cool. Very, very cool. I want to go shake their.
Definitely, we need to give a round of applause to UCLA. Great job, guys. All right. Sure. You go on my computer and me. It's on mine.
And meeting, yeah.
And then that's.
Wait,
There's also that.
I was trying to get out.